Welcome. So this is an impromptu live stream. I apologize for everyone. There's probably almost no one viewing this right now because of the fact that we had to abandon ship on the first live stream and create a new one. So hopefully people will trickle in, but this is the Unpopular Opinions live stream. So back in December, at the prompting of Academic Agent, who's not in a time zone amenable to mine, I decided to do a one like, one unpopular opinion. And I got 230 likes, but I stopped after giving 100 unpopular opinions because I was waiting for a delayed plane. And, well, the flight plus the wait corresponded to roughly 100 opinions. Afterwards, I didn't really have time to sit in front of Twitter and just pile off more unpopular opinions, although I will furnish them on request. So joining me today are, well, let's go around the table, starting with my lovely fiance.
Hello, I'm Catholic Wench.
And, well, let's see, Fritz Imperial.
Yo.
And Intermezzo, or is it Intermezzo?
Intermezzo.
Intermezzo. Okay. The music major corrects my ignorance. What does intermezzo mean, Catholic Wench?
Oh.
Doesn't it mean in between or medium?
Yeah, it's
it means in the middle.
Yeah.
Hence mezzo soprano.
I wish I could remember more of the music terminology from when I took piano lessons.
All I know is dolce.
At least I can still play Furlies and can still read sheet music. So
yeah, but it's kind of like a musical movement that's in the middle of a whole orchestral piece.
Well, I do intend, Catholic Wench, to have us do a few discussions on Catholic music, not Catholic music, on classical music. That maybe, I mean, I've given you some French impressionist music, and I was hoping you might be able to walk us through what you like about French impressionism so much.
Right now?
No. Just like eventually in the future.
Is that an unpopular opinion?
No, it's not. I'm waiting for people to stream in because we did a switcheroo on them. So it's not fair to launch into the unpopular opinions quite yet. Although I will copy the link to the chat as well as to the voice chat that we're in. I think that came through. Okay. Well, at any rate, I think if everyone's ready. Oh, by the way, this is an incredibly informal live stream. So, feel free to ask questions, or I don't want like just random shit posting, but at the same time, I want to make sure that people feel free to change the topic. It's a sort of informal. I'm not tightly controlling this like I do a lot of my other conversations. Okay, I'll kick off with one unpopular opinion that's not on my list. Did anyone notice that the chats are now appearing in the actual live streams that you go historically and see?
Yes, I did notice that.
I know.
Are you creeped the hell out? Are you creeped out about that as much as I am?
Yeah, it is sort of disturbing because I keep thinking because I checked the podcast that I did yesterday, and it's like, it's like you could still see it. I'm like, what if like some like demon thing starts posting in there, like 666 Hail Satan?
Well, I'm not so worried about the demon thing unless the demon thing are the people at Google and their block bots.
I don't really see the difference though.
What? Well, okay, sure, but like, I mean, what right? If you post on the dissident right like we do, you inevitably have one or two people who are like, "Ma Jews, swastika, swastika, swastika," on your chat, right? Like, there's always one troll like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now it's part of the actual video. Like, there's a whole new reason to take down a video now, or cooperate with Google's desire to censor people's comments.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an ingenious wedge issue if this is politically motivated. I don't know. It's hard to say. Maybe I'm just being paranoid.
No, I can see the problem with that. Yeah, that does sort of disturb me as well. I thought it was just a weird thing with the last stream I did, but apparently it's not just me.
If I really wish I could just through OBS I will just try to have the chats that actually contribute or super chats appear, but I'm terrified of trolls now.
Thank you for broadcasting that out on this live stream, Dave. Dave,
What?
I said thank you for broadcasting that you're now terrified of trolls on a live stream.
Well, okay. Well, I mean, likely you think trolls are going to suddenly flock here? I don't know. I think there's a little bit more organization. There's less organization among trolls, unless they're literally Google bots or whatever.
Wait, didn't you hear? Trolls are just an army organized and programmed by the Russian government.
Ah, yes.
I myself am a Russian bot.
Robo trolls. I've steered clear of that. So, well, anyway, so before I get off topic, let's just go straight on to the unpopular opinions. I think that's okay. So, 100 unpopular opinions on this following academic agents model, where I list one unpopular opinion, and we'll discuss it, and that will be the entire thing. Okay, so this one was an unpopular opinion that I kicked off the series with. I thought it would be a bang, but subsequent to this late December, this was done in early December, this is no longer controversial. And that is, the first unpopular opinion is Star Wars sucks.
I think you suck.
Oh, you know I don't like Star Wars.
Well, okay, be a little more specific. Are you talking about the original trilogy that came out like late 70s, early 80s? Or are you just talking about the entire thing, or just the new ones that came out, which spoiled the older ones? Like,
well, I feel, I don't know. I guess when I wrote this tweet, I was feeling in a very anti-Star Wars mood. And I rewatched. Didn't we rewatch some of the Star Wars movies together? Like, did we rewatch Empire Strikes Back?
Yeah,
like
we did.
A year ago or something like that.
No, like a month ago.
A month ago.
Yeah.
Okay. It feels like
Oh.
feels like here. No, but it was good. It was good, right? And I thought, like, wow, this is good filmmaking, but at the same time, I was just kind of like, I guess when you're sort of used to, by modern standards, it is a little bit, the universe feels a little bit stale, and there's all these things that now are kind of feel a little bit cardboardy, I guess.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Archie, can I make a statement about this?
Sure, go ahead.
I think the issue is, I think the original Star Wars films, as when they came out, and I still think objectively today, are some of the best, most popular and like best films ever made in cinema. And I think the problem is how we consume them now versus when they originally came out, because you sort of look at when they became popular back then is like the sort of simplicity to them. And these were very good movies that told a really good story that people liked, but they didn't obsess over them the way that Disney sort of forces it now, where Star Wars is it's like a cult now. It's like, again, I think everybody needs to watch that Red Letter Media review of the Last Jedi, where they, especially like the last 15 minutes, where they compare like how these like Star Wars celebrations have like 50,000 people screaming their heads off. Well, these Disney executives show them 5 seconds of a trailer, and it's like they're cult leaders brainwashing people, as opposed to like I firmly believe now that
let's just separate the movies from the cult that emerged around Star Wars. I think we're probably in agreement about the latter, right?
Mm-hmm.
That definitely colors it, right? And a lot of these opinions are more emotional than they are analytical, although some of them I will defend analytically. By the way, I labeled the opinions based on who they're supposed to piss off. So this is N1, so it's supposed to piss off nerds or nerd culture people.
That was supposed to piss off everyone.
What? Well,
N1 meant to.
This opinion here, Star Wars sucks, is now something that, since The Last Jedi came out, is being repeated very often in YouTube. And it's almost a cliche at this point. The pissed off Star Wars fanboy that says he's done with the series has become, for some reason, it was The Last Jedi that really facilitated this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not, well, I guess I am sort of sure why. But I know, I guess, like, as movies, like The Empire Strikes Back in particular is a movie that is a classic, right? I guess I'm sort of contradicting myself. the first movie sort of transcended a genre, but it's still very much part of that genre. Like the whole Buck Rogers sort of John Carter on Mars type adventure story that was popular in the 30s kind of reached its culmination in Star Wars.
And I think, because I think of the original, my favorite is the one I actually like the best is still the original movie, A New Hope. And I think it's because, I mean, first off, I think it's because its story is just so utterly simple. Like, you don't have all these like multiple endings towards the end where you have to follow everything. Everything sort of flawlessly leads into destroy the Death Star. And, you know, because you sort of see it as it was being able to have a science fiction fantasy, you know, space opera film that wasn't a cheap, you know, cheesy piece of crap that would be, you know, featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000. And I think in that it succeeded phenomenally.
Yes. And well, and I think this is, you make a good point, Fritz, and that is that it is arguable that although The Empire Strikes Back is the best movie, A New Hope is as good a Star Wars movie as you could ever get. Because I think as soon, you know, in some sense, every great downfall is a product of a golden age and its own internal shortcomings. And the current iteration of Star Wars movies, its downfall is created by The Empire Strikes Back, not the original Star Wars, A New Hope. The problem is that because of The Empire Strikes Back, directors are now trying to embed moral messages inside Star Wars movies, inside movies about space wizards, right? And the question I think that The Last Jedi raises is, well, can the innocuous pablum that we call modern day philosophy be supported inside an epic infrastructure? And apparently it can't.
But, go ahead.
No, that was it.
I mean, I think it's just because even though I will admit I did not see The Last Jedi, but I've watched enough reviews of it to sort of get a pretty good idea of what the plot was and the issues people had with it. And I think you made a point where its problem is it's trying to simultaneously, you know, shovel in as much fan service and homages to the original films, especially The Empire Strikes Back, because this is the second movie in the trilogy, as was the Empire Strikes Back. But you sort of see them trying to just murder and destroy all the legacy of the original cast so they can make way for these new, nice, diverse cast of characters. It's like,
well, they were going to need to do that eventually, right? They needed to kill off the main characters.
I do love how, although it's
what's so funny is that they didn't. And the worst part of the last movie was an instance of them not killing off a main character that they needed to kill off. Catholic Wench, when we saw that movie in the movie theater, like I don't know, maybe you hear this, I heard giggles in the audience when Princess Leia did the Mary Poppins float through space. Do you remember that? Like I was kind of cracking up.
Well, I didn't hear laughter, but I was extremely turned off by that.
Because there was like this cathartic end of Princess Leia, and Carrie Fisher was dead, so they needed to get rid of her. And she floats back into the plot just so she can lecture people more. It was bizarre.
It was absolutely stupid. It was beyond bizarre. We had to mourn Carrie Fisher twice, and they still resurrected her corpse.
Yeah, again, it's like they made the wrong bet with that. They kill off Han Solo, they kill off Luke. Oh wait,
you thought we were going to give Princess Leia a dignified ending, but no, have you seen Meat Puppet Princess Leia?
No, they're going to do the
dangling on the ends of the plot threads hung by Disney. She will perform in endless sci-fi franchise Star Wars movies.
You just see a skeleton with the hair buns.
That would be a funny parody. But I guess I'm going to have to. We're off to a great start because I'm down one unpopular opinion. I'm already having to eat my words, and that is that I have to acknowledge that Star Wars, the original one, was close to a perfect mindless sci-fi adventure, and The Empire Strikes Back took sci-fi adventures to a place they never had been. I guess my problem is that I'm not so sure that sci-fi adventures need to be mixed with philosophical sci-fi. I'm growing to the point where I think that I'd rather just have a romantic action movie or a movie that's trying to communicate some message. And I'm not so sure I really want to have them married together.
You don't want your peas and carrots mixed.
Well, it's a stupid desire because ultimately that particular pea and carrot is what humans really want to have mixed together.
Though I think in a way you can, there's not in your sort of cultural diet, like you don't have to eat them at the same time. Maybe it is better to have them at, it's like what you said about the Miyazaki films or the Studio Ghibli films, where it's like you can have, have My Neighbor Totoro and Grave of the Fireflies, but not in the same movie, because that would have been a disaster.
Yeah, but both Grave of the Fireflies, My Neighbor Totoro are definitely not just fun.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's, I think, one reason why they work. I guess this is just, again, this is a very petty desire. My petty desire at this moment is to have the sort of classic sci-fi movies with the deep introspective plots like 2001 separated from we're going to have a movie about space wizards and lasers. And that's an incredibly superficial desire, but it's something that I'm feeling intently after my latest experiences.
And I actually think ultimately, in some ways, you could see maybe that's what George Lucas wanted, because the actual project that he was part of, that I think was, the best of the stuff he was completely in control of, was the Clone Wars series. And you kind of get this idea that that's sort of like just this fun, like, war with robots and jet and like space wizards was what he wanted, instead of he still probably wanted to make the prequels, but we all know how that turned out.
I get the sense that Empire Strikes Back with Star Wars being taken away from George Lucas. I got the impression that he never wanted Star Wars to be as serious as The Empire Strikes Back made it. And that he had no ability to really make movies at that level. The Empire Strikes Back, really, among the Star Wars movies, it to me just stands out as being both the redheaded stepchild and the series' true masterpiece, but also the series' true undoing.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think before that movie, it was just kind of almost like a random movie, and then they tried to make it grander than it had to be. And I think that really kind of, from then on, maybe like the Return of the Jedi was fine, but then they essentially, the universe wasn't big enough from the first film to actually encapsulate a large series.
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, if you look at sort of the scenes that George Lucas was attempting to make, and I know I told you I would send you a link to this, but there is Jarodowski and a bunch of other French sci-fi creators did these sort of elaborate universes that were super colorful and super playful and really imaginative, but they didn't really connect together very well. This is the imagistics that inspires things like the Fifth Element and a variety of these other hyper colorful sci-fi universes. And they're also highly inspired by the Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon type movies. And I think that, if I look back at the prequels, I'm wondering if George Lucas did not want to make something like the Incal or something that Jarodowski would want, something that was super surrealistic and wasn't meant to be taken seriously. And that the weight of the universe, that had been constructed in the subsequent 20 years forced the prequels into a more serious mode than they could sustain. I mean, midichlorians would be very much at home in Flash Gordon. Like, if Flash Gordon learned that his power came from midichlorians, I mean, that would be fine. I wouldn't care. Mm-hmm. But because Yoda, as like a Jesus-like figure, gives this speech about how the Force is my ally in darkness, then all of a sudden now we learn not that the super space wizard's power comes from little microscopic organisms in his blood, but that like the Holy Spirit lives in little cells in our blood. And that's stupid.
I was going to say, is because you could think about it, Coruscant, the planet that's just one enormous city, like that would be like that in itself would be an excellent, like almost cyberpunk, dystopian science fiction movie in itself. Like there's so much you could do with that, and it's only like a small part, or it's just a backdrop to this, narrative that I think Lucas sort of was forced to make.
Yeah, it's hard to say. The new series is really, it really just demonstrates that bad movies are created by conflicting visions, and perhaps less so by people just being idiots. Right. I have to sort of reevaluate my take on Lucas. Right. And that's the thing, because if you ask what the best scene from Star Wars, the prequels would be, I say it would be the opera scene. Right. But that again, right, is at total dissonance with the rest of the
It almost
series.
feels like it's an entirely different movie.
Yeah, it has no place in the series. That they say this in Hollywood, that no scene is worth a movie, and no piece of dialogue is worth a scene. And that's the problem, because I got the sense that Lucas wanted to make scenes, right? And if you look at the prequel, I don't know if people are probably like Fritz are too young to remember this, but I remember the prequel coming out.
I remember the prequels.
I remember the prequel, the trailer for the prequel coming out, because it was shown before The Matrix, right? And that prequel trailer was amazing. It was amazing because it was just a series of scenes that were highly imaginative, right? And that's really, I think, George Lucas just wanted to have a fun romp through these universes, and he didn't really want to tell any kind of deep story.
Like, again, like one of the people will still say, like, a good actual scene from the prequels was the pod race, and that was completely pointless.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it still went a little bit long, but I think this question's gone a bit long. So, I don't know. Does anyone want to say anything more about Star Wars? Catholic wench?
Nope.
I'm good.
Okay. I imagine if people want to come in or leave, they can do so whenever. We're just going to get through a few of these questions, or as many as we like, before people start getting bored. But I have one that's designed to piss off, or will probably piss off, a completely different contender. Okay. This is designed to piss off history buffs. Number 2, German history is largely comprised of situations where the German people are asked to save Christian civilization, and then saying no thank you. I stand by this opinion. Maybe there's not going to be any disagreement, because I feel like there's just too many examples.
I don't think they were really asked to defend Christian civilization too much outside the Crusades, because they were at the heart of Europe. They're not on the fringes like Hungary was, or like the Byzantine Empire was, or like Spain was, or Portugal.
The Holy Roman Empire was the heart of Christendom. With the Holy Roman Empire, and that's one reason why I said the big turning point of the Renaissance should be placed at 1000 AD and not 1400. A, because that was a turning point in terms of technological development in Europe, and B, because it marked the consolidation of an extensive Christian empire that spanned throughout most of Western Europe.
Could I please mention this? I actually think you're right in a lot of ways, because especially now with my own becoming Catholic worldview, I am not functionally Anglican, thank you very much. But that Germany being, following the Middle Ages, following the emergence of the Holy Roman Empire, essentially did become sort of a locus of the most dominant power individually in Europe, owing to Germany's large size, large population, and high amounts of economic productivity, and sort of that energy of that sort of German energy has been, has I think, as you can see with the Holy Roman Empire. I mean, wouldn't you agree that was sort of like the Catholic Church's, dream come true? That was the project that they wanted ever since the fall of the Roman Empire, is to get some sort of established secular political order that was, that was loyal to them religiously. And I think,
well, most of the Middle Ages was divided in between two international political parties, the Ghibellines and the Guelphs. And the Guelphs felt that that basically it was just the church and the king, so the various European countries. And those were the people mainly allied with France. And then there was the Ghibellines, who were the people who felt that Christ in some ways nominated a secular authority to lead the West, in addition to the spiritual authority of the church. And this interplay you can see very, very markedly in Dante's Divine Comedy. But the Holy Roman Empire is central to this vision.
And I think in a way you can see it because, like, imagine if right now, instead of the, almost nightmare that is the current German political and social order, if Germany was a devoutly Christian, conservative, traditional country, if they were being the main economic and political and social and cultural influence in Europe.
They are the main social, political, and cultural. Germany, due to its population and its economy,
and its central location,
will always be the core of Europe.
Yeah,
That being said, Germany has been the site of the great failings. I mean, there's just so many of them. It's the great failings of all.
Mm-hmm.
Christian civilization's attempt. It was a failure to consolidate a new Roman Empire that wasn't strictly, an imperial ambition in the Middle Ages. It was a failure to reform the church in the 1500s. It was a failure to push back against, the division and infighting that took place before Napoleon. It was a failure to find an alternative to imperialism in the 19th century. And it was a failure to create an alternative anti-communist front that didn't lead to another giant fratricidal war in the 30s. It's a series of failures.
Why do you think it kept happening?
Oh, sorry. Well, I think we cut off intermezzo.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Intermezzo.
Okay. I do have to kind of contrast that just because. So first of all, France actually had a larger population than Germany until about 50 years before World War I. So
that is actually true.
That is true. Also France. So first of all, I don't really see France and Germany as two separate kingdoms. Specifically early on in the Middle Ages, I kind of see. So it was largely
neither the early popes either.
Yeah, no, and so I kind of see them as a unified kingdom, and I think it's to lay all the blame on Germany early on, and to kind of see them being the standard bearer for Christianity or Catholicism early on in the Middle Ages, I think is a little simplistic. I think later on, sure, but I don't think that Germany was really, just because another part of it is just that all these different kingdoms were so separate and so distinct from each other, and people didn't really travel as much. I kind of feel like the Germans, they were kind of isolated in their own part of Europe for a significant part of time. That's not to say that later on that they did have a lot of failings, yes, but I really wouldn't. Like the early Middle Ages, it's hard to actually define what Germany actually is at that period of time.
Well, I mean, you can do it linguistically. That would be the easiest way to do it, right? And regardless of how much we wished France and Germany were the same countries, the fact of the matter is that on one side of the Rhine, people spoke a very different language than on the other side of the Rhine.
Well, sure. Even though in the middle, they kind of spoke a lot of mixes, and the languages really were kind of borderline communicable throughout most of these other areas as well.
Yeah, I mean, and when you're saying Germany had a smaller population, you're certainly not taking into account the massive German diaspora that existed throughout Eastern Europe.
Yeah, but they.
So I mean, when it comes down to it, I think there's a reason why it was a central country during that time, but. I don't know. Just a thought. I thought there would be more pushback, but
I was going to say. So, why do you think the failures continued over and over again? If you believe that to be the case,
I don't know. G.K. Chesterton thought that. I mean, sort of predictably, that it was Germany's inability to fully internalize Catholicism the way that France had. Of course, G.K. Chesterton was a Francophile and had not as much love for German culture. Where I tend to be more sympathetic to German culture,
specifically South German.
I do have to say I'm perhaps the guy pushing back, but I do think there were definitely periods of German history where they did actually fight back against invaders, and where they actually did.
Napoleon.
Well, I'm thinking earlier. You go back to the Mongols. The Holy Roman Empire in Hungary. They were the people who repelled the Mongols, and with the Allied. Polish, they were able to repel the Ottomans and all these, and they were actually able to kind of maintain the culture of Europe later on, after a lot of the plagues, and when when England and France were embattled in the 100 Years' War, and it actually, I don't think it was as poor a transmitter of the Christian faith as we're kind of leading on.
It's certainly not. There are great saints in Germany and great,
Well, okay, I was talking about it as a political entity, not
cultural one.
I don't think that
Germans
as a people are obviously me being mostly German.
And maybe it's also because I'm not I don't really view these countries as very nationalistic entities really until like the 19th century. So I don't really see them as, there really wasn't a quote German people at that time, or a French people, or an Italian people at that time.
The reason why why nationalism started to really kick it in Germany was largely out of a reaction to the perceived continued invasions by France, and sort of this sort of idea that the only way that Germany could be safe from being invaded by France over and over again was if they were one country. And again, this is the Romantic period, so you sort of get these, when you start getting the, Romanticism and early nationalism starting in France and a little bit in America, but, the revolt in Greece to create the Greek nation, it starts spilling over into Germany, and especially with a lot of the music. I did a whole essay on this in college of Ernst Moritz Arndt, who wrote a whole bunch of essentially they were like resistance patriotic songs towards the end of the Napoleonic Wars, about unifying Germany to fight back against the French, as sort of a sacred duty from God.
Well, certainly that probably had something to do with it. Obviously, people like Wagner were huge nationalist figures. He probably had imagistically more to do with that than anyone else. But I don't know. I think I guess I'm interested in the mistakes.
Was Wagner? Wait, was Wagner composing? Was he popular before the Frankfurt Assembly?
I don't know. When was the Frankfurt Assembly?
1849.
I believe he was popular before then. Catholic Lunch, do you know when his big hits came out? He had a bunch of them really. Yeah, he had a bunch of them.
Like late 1800s?
No, mid 1800s.
Okay, mid 1800s. Well, there you go. I've never been a big fan of Wagner anyway.
Have you ever heard his Brot und Wein? I can't remember what play it's exactly from, but there's a beautiful part of an opera about the Eucharist, and it's sort of actually just featured. You can find a clip of it on YouTube where it's a bunch of World War I German soldiers taking the Eucharist and singing this beautifully religious song.
Is it Parsifal or?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's Parsifal.
That's the one that would strike me as the one that's most likely to have a song about the Eucharist. But I don't know. I'm not the biggest expert on Wagner. But I don't know. That's neither here nor there. I guess I'm very interested in Germany's failures, because I think that if you're talking about, Germany is kind of the eternal pushback to the spirit of the age, right? It was a resistance against Napoleon. It was a resistance against communism. But it had failed in its attempts. So I guess I'm sort of interested in its failures. And
I think you can sort of understand part of. I wouldn't say with Napoleon, I wouldn't say it was a failure. I'd say obviously in the end they were instrumental in helping defeat Napoleon.
Oh yeah, but
who was it that came in at the end? Even at the end, and Waterloo was because of Blucher and the Prussians that saved the British.
Well, it was instrumental in defeating. It was instrumental in defeating the actual figure of Napoleon. I think that it's arguable that in many ways the ideas of the Napoleonic Revolution obtained a victory in a way.
In the sense of sort of liberalism not being fully stamped out, I don't think you can blame that Prussia and Austria for not doing for not actually trying, because they sure as heck did try and stamp out liberalism and a lot of the Enlightenment thought within their respective countries in the decades following the war.
Well, but I mean, I'm going to quote Victor Hugo here, right? They're trying to kill an idea with a law is a futile endeavor. You have to kill an idea with an alternative opposing idea. And they never did that. But anyway, sorry.
I mean, I think that's a much longer conversation, but if you want to move on, that's fine.
Oh, no, I mean, we can have it. I guess they just get spicier from here on out.
All right.
Okay, well, this one's an alt-right one. You don't have anyone who's alt-right on the stream? This is the first stream I've ever had that didn't have, like, an alt-right infiltrator.
Maybe I should invite Dr. Ergodorantia on. Wow.
Oh, okay. Well,
no, it's fine.
maybe we'll return to this one.
Okay.
I'm going to kind of deviate from the
out.
academic agent model where they just talk straight about these things. So this unpopular opinion says, excuse me, the white race and the way it was conceived in the late 19th century and in the way the alt-right means it is functionally unsavable.
More or less.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would. Well, maybe if we add some person in who wants to resist at that point.
Wait, run that by me again.
Okay, so the concept of the white race as it existed in the 19th century and as the alt-right talks about it today is unsavable at this point, in the sense that it cannot be preserved going forward into the future.
Culturally or like genetically?
Well, I think the alt-right and the 19th century people meant it genetically. So,
actually, I do think it can be preserved in enclaves.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, at this point, well, I don't know. This is the thing where we're kind of arguing against an opponent that isn't here to defend themselves, right?
Plus, also, I wouldn't be surprised if in Europe, if they don't actually have an expulsion of refugees or something like that.
I don't know. If one of the alt-right regulars like Expat or Jelly Croc hopped onto the stream, I'd wonder if they even disagree with this. I mean, I think that given the demographic trends that the world is going to undergo, it's going to be interesting to see what any kind of Western alliance looks like in 50 years.
Yeah, I think I don't think I think that they need to actually change up the reproduction rates for them to.
Well, I mean, they're not, so.
Yeah. And also, I was just messaged from Blackjack, and he was wondering if he would like to come on.
Okay, he didn't DM me. I mean, you can pass him a link, I guess.
Okay, I'll go.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm gonna toss him a link here.
Someone sent you a $2 super chat, and it said Germans ruin everything.
Did I miss a super chat?
Yeah, it was like no, it was $1.99.
Okay, I'm sorry, guys. Oh, here we go. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll have to read this out. Ian McDonald, hashtag Germans ruin everything.
Tell that to Bach.
Well, I know we all have our favorite things that come from Germany, but I don't know. Recently developed ideas, maybe not so much. Although I know I was, from the little of Hegel I read, I was really anti-Hegelian, and I guess Fritz is becoming increasingly pro-Hegelian.
I mean, just from what I've read about it, he's certainly esoteric and very difficult to read, and he sounds like he's got his head up in the clouds. But like, I don't really understand why or where. I mean, it's not people don't actually hate Hegel. What they hate is what is his followers. Is a group of his followers. It is actually only one group of his followers. The young Hegelians or the left Hegelians were the group of people that decided to reject. Because his understanding was Hegelianism was itself non-materialistic, very, very, almost explicitly sort of spiritualistic in many ways. But
that's one apology I've heard for Hegel. Actual theory of history. It was supposed to be a spiritual theory or something like that.
Yeah, it was supposed to be like the theory of ideas, and it's a theory of sort of an understanding of like spirit, of sort of the passion of like ideas, not like just all history. But anyways, like it's the young Hegelians, people like Marx, Engels, and Stirner were the ones that sort of separated it from an actual metaphysical understanding and became strict materialists. And unfortunately, they became the famous ones, whereas the old Hegelians more or less just went on to be like Lutheran theologians and Prussian like statesmen, because they just sort of interpreted it to reinforce sort of traditional like structures within the Prussian government.
Well, it sort of became the state philosophy of Prussia.
State
of Prussia for a while.
Yeah, your mic is a little bit
on my shit
on the front. But well, I guess this is always the problem with Hegelianism, right? It either seems to be a dogged defense of the status quo, or be a formula for conducting some sweeping revolution by which we flatten all contemporary institutions and replace them with.
Is that slightly better?
No,
you're still a robot.
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, I don't think, maybe I've been unfair to Hegel. I just would have to see a way to apply him to a problem that doesn't sort of track back to, the way the left uses Hegel.
Okay. So what's the next unpopular opinion?
Okay. Well, thank you, Ian McDonald, for the super chat. The next unpopular opinion.
You
missed the alt-right one. I was actually pretending to get. Bill Buckley was right to say conservatism was standing athwart the train tracks of history, yelling, "Stop!" But now it's less standing and yelling and more lying down and silently sobbing to oneself. I don't know. I feel like this is just like a fresh way of saying something that people are kind of noticing right now. This might have been a hot take in 2017. It's feeling less fresh now.
It's pretty cold. Is my mic any better, or is it?
That's fine.
A lot better.
Okay, well,
much better.
Good.
But if only we could do something about your voice.
Well, I can't. I've tried. Can't do anything about it.
Well, but back onto the topic, I guess. I mean, conservatism is dead, or Buckley-eyed conservatism is in the process of dying. Hello? Okay. Can you not hear me, or he's...
No, I can hear you now.
Okay. All right. So I think this tweet is... Well, I guess this is sort of the eternal frustration of people on the dissident right, is that conservatism as it exists on Fox News and as it's consumed by baby boomers is dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's total inability to provide any actual, political results as a pushback against progressivism is just evident that in 60 years, not one democratic social policy, not one progressive social policy has ever been reversed by the Republicans.
Well, but I mean, it's so funny about this is like people like Sargon understand that this is the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is not, everyone understands this except for the Fox News viewership. Sargon of Akkad and the liberalists,
whatever they're called. They'll come up with a new name next week.
They understand. Well, I mean, like I said before, they're advocating for conservatism, but they know better than to say that because they know conservatism is dead, right?
They're advocating for a secular conservatism. It seems like.
So basically, a worse version.
They found a way to make conservatism even more castrated.
Yeah.
I guess it's sort of, I guess post Gamergate and post a lot of these reactions against feminism, it's tempting to believe that liberal testivism, dodges the bullet that was experienced by Bush-style conservatism, but it really just loses any of its impetus to have any kind of cultural resistance.
I mean, my view on it is, and I'll put this as sort of part of the main idea of the video I'll make, and then I think I'll make it early next week on my criticism of this. It's just the fact that when you have liberal principles are excellent, can be very effective in societies like late 18th and early 19th century American Britain, when you have a highly moral, highly religious, high trust, highly culturally homogenous societies, but the current order in which these ideas are able to be propagated, or in which people can actually you can trust people to respect each other's freedom of speech and expression, is completely breaking down. And this is, if Sargon if you were to ask Sargon or a lot of these people whether or not they would have agreed with the sort of 1990s, let's just spread democracy to the world, I think a lot of them at first would just say, well, the example of Iraq shows that that's not the case. But, if they agree with that,
they must believe it at some stage, right? This is the thing, right? Because you either believe that you're going to create enclaves for Western civilization, in which case, if the basis of your political consciousness is based exclusively on a particularist value, like Western values, then you're functionally doing nationalism. You're just not admitting it.
Well,
but the alternative is that you're going to ride the wave of globalization, and we're going to be ruled by some quasi-central authority, be it a combination of the World Bank or the United Nations. In which case, you better believe that liberal principles are exportable to sub-Saharan Africa, because sub-Saharan Africa is going to have a damn big voting bloc in that new world order if it's at all democratic.
And I think, just to end on that, my view on that is the fact that either they have to accept one of those two options, or the problem becomes, if you can't spread democracy, if you can't spread these values without decades or centuries of slow social struggle and change, then they would have to start accepting, if you can't, if underneath every Islamic dictatorship there's like the 60-70% of the population are actually like secular liberals, if that's apparently not the case, then they also have to deal with the fact that the bastions of classical liberalism, i.e. US, Canada, and Britain, are increasingly becoming these societies legally and socially are becoming increasingly hostile to classical liberalism. I mean, how is classical liberalism going to survive when like 50% of college students in America don't believe that hate speech is free speech?
Yeah. I think you sort of hit on a more interesting topic earlier, Fritz, although we can probably move back if it's not necessary. But
go for it.
The idea that Sargon and all those are, I mean, they'll say now that as much as anybody will listen that they're against the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But if you had asked them about something similar before those wars had happened, if they were the same person they are now, then I have a feeling most of them would support those actions.
I mean, in a way, I think, as I just recently said, I do think cultural change towards certain different ideologies is possible within a very long time frame if you want to do it more or less peacefully. But again, even then, like, in order for America and Britain to get to the position in which they were espousing, you had Loki, Thomas Paine, the founding fathers, espousing classical liberalism. This was only after the result of centuries of tradition, struggle, and hardship that molded people and shaped a culture that valued a restraint on government. And and of course the problem with this is that if the Magna Carta is the sort of basis for the English tradition of being skeptical of centralized authoritarian governments, or at least having some sort of principle of restraint in government, then it starts unraveling when you have people like Thomas Paine who write entire treaties completely stamping on and pissing on the whole traditions of the cultures that created their ability to have that classical liberalism.
Yeah, and even
I don't want to put it in too cute of a format, but whatever it was that this classical liberal idea needed to function, I think manifestly don't have it anymore.
Yeah,
it's the thing is I probably would quibble over some of the details about what Fritz was laying out, or maybe I'd add in a few more points or whatever, and that's an academic discussion. But what seems increasingly hard for me to believe that anyone else believes is that somehow, a partisan political unit like the Republican Party is going to bring the political discourse in this country under a new dispensation just by yelling "my Constitution, my individual rights" loud enough.
Because again, like, I think we can end it by saying, what good does talking about the virtues of the Constitution do when people don't actually, when
people don't believe in those virtues?
When large, not even that, when large segments of the population don't even believe in the validity of the Constitution.
This is the thing.
But I mean, this is all beating a dead horse right now. So
yeah,
I mean, the thing is that I've said this to somebody who came on my channel the other day, or I came on their podcast, and I said that, if you just say rights in a different way, a lot of the woo-woo around liberalism goes away. If I told you that a right was the same thing as a vow made by the government, then I think you immediately, because I think it's true. I think it's true. And I think it's sacred in the same way. But immediately, a lot of the woo-woo, I know that's an atheist term. Woo-woo just means like you say it in a kind of poetic way and hope that no one asks a lot of questions. Well, human rights, or it's my right, or I have the right to do this. It sounds a lot different when you put it in terms of this is a vow that society makes. Because you immediately are conscious of what is going on when we talk about a right. And we're talking about a right when no one understands what a vow means.
Yeah, and the sort of, I think, original context, not to sound like a classical, American conservative here, but in certain ways, I think you could also see the understanding of rights as founders would have understood it, or these things that are guaranteed us by God that the government is going to vow that it will uphold. This is a reflection of an earlier Christian society in which essentially people had, as beings created the Imago Dei, certain things that you could not violate. And I think if they wanted to be, if the sort of intrinsic sacred human dignity, if it wanted to be put in more clear terms, I think that's certainly fine. But again, you then come to the problem is, well, what happens if you're going to want to support these liberties, but you don't actually believe in God?
Well, but this, I don't know. I think that might be true on some level, Fritz, but I think that, putting it in that way is, I think it will, I think a lot of this hinges on making us let people like Sargon understand what's going on. And I think, the problem is if you take it back too far, it becomes sort of, you sort of fall prey to a lot of the easy answers they have to these questions. Like the easy answer to that formulation of the principle is, well, there were tons of atheists that signed the Constitution that fought for blah, blah, blah. Like they have it ready to go, right?
Well, I understand that.
So, like, but when you put it in terms of the vow, I feel like it's just manifestly true. And B, I feel like it sort of refocuses the question on the dedication of the people that are carrying it out and the principles that animate them, which reasserts the question of objective morality. But I don't know. Again, this is quibbling over details.
I think, I agree with you that, you don't open up with God because that's where they have had their sights trained on for a number, for years.
So much of this whole conversation is like terminology. Reactionary Expat had a video about using terminology in the correct ways. So much of my understanding of how knowledge works. Initially, I thought that that knowledge was that knowledge was sort of 90% spirit and 10% expression. But now I think humanity's struggle with knowledge is almost 90% expression and 10% spirit. I think that once you discard the idea that there's any spirit inside knowledge, you become a sophist. But I think that there's a certain amount of reality that, as far as humans are concerned, if people say things in a certain way or use evocative terminology, people will believe it and go along with it, regardless of of how it actually rings true at a very deep metaphysical level.
So what's the next unpopular opinion?
Yeah, I'm getting bogged down. There's one that's like designed for Catholic wench. Oh yeah, here it is. Okay, this is designed for conservatives and Christians. Christianity has a masculinity problem.
Yes.
You're not? Are you Catholic wench? No.
Oh, I thought that was just a general statement.
Sir, again, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but
actually,
maybe
could you repeat what it was? I didn't hear.
Christianity has a masculinity problem.
I think it does.
I think this is really obvious to everyone outside of Christianity. Oops.
And a few people inside it.
Do you know what I don't understand? Like, I'm not a Christian man, obviously. I'm distributist, but like there are the virtues that Christianity teaches, like kindness and compassion, blah blah blah. How do men live as aggressive men who like to take charge, take over the world, and still live according to these virtues? I think that fine line is difficult for a lot of men in the church. I think because of that, a lot of men end up passive and defeated, and I find that particularly unattractive as a Christian woman anyway. So anyway,
this is the thing, right? And you see this if you hang around Christian youth groups, is that, well, I mean, in cities there's enough people there, so you've got a robust number of men who are very confident and very masculine, very on top of things. But you also have sort of a lot of people who are highly defeated. And I think the reason is that the way we define masculinity in the present day really runs opposite to a bunch of Christian principles. So you have a bunch of people that can't sort of live up to secular masculinity, sort of taking refuge in Christianity. I don't know. Maybe this is being totally.
Well, see, this is not what I'm thinking of. What I think when I think of the masculinity problem, and this is sort of a recent thought of mine, is a mistake that a lot of people within Christianity make, where they mistake being passive for kindness.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where a lot more of this problem lies, where we've mistaken sort of kindness, just to sort of give an example, right? A lot of how we're told how to be kind is to just sort of let people, leave them alone, just be passive towards them. When in reality, it's not kind to let somebody continue to poison themselves with heroin, but it's seen as or even to continue living in a way that's not conducive to their either mental, physical, or spiritual health. And yet we're sort of told that kindness is letting these people go on this way because to interfere with them would be unkind in some way. I don't really.
Even beyond that, I think Christianity does has some amount of problems. I mean, in its current iteration, really attracting powerful personalities to it. I guess.
I also think the liturgy has been too feminized. The Catholic liturgy.
Wow! I wish Pius was here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Catholic wench. You think the liturgy's become too feminized? Could you elaborate?
Yeah. Well, like some Catholic churches I've been to when I travel have sort of like a kumbaya songs with clapping, and it's more community lovey-dovey kind of thing rather than encouraging people to look above themselves into something greater, and just making it more I don't know, like soft and family friendly with folkish kind of music and warm feeling. I think I would consider that more of a feminine quality. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with building community, but I think for mass, it's community is secondary, and worshiping that which is greater than you is primary. And I think they're messing up that boundary a little bit.
Yeah, that softness is actually contrary to the virtue of masculinity as it's.
I would want to comment on just what Distributus says, because I didn't want to leave that part hanging, because I actually think there's a good answer for why Christianity might in the modern world have a particularly difficult time attracting powerful men is because powerful men are about the only demographic that actually benefits from the sexual revolution. That if Christianity being something that stands explicitly against the principles of the sexual revolution, saying actually no, you are not allowed to sleep with multiple different women, you're not allowed to have all these divorces, you're not allowed to be the sort of it offers us masculinity that an image of manhood that is not conducive to sort of a lot of deeply embedded biological urges. Like, there's this sort of saying that men tend to trend towards polygamy, women towards hypergamy. I think there's so much truth to that, because the revolution, the sexual revolution that Christianity installed was actually saying no to polygamy, no to divorce, no to women and children being the property of men who basically have the power of life and death over them, and ensuring sort of more equal partnership, which led to I think objectively vastly better sexual and social culture than the sort of pagan polygamists around them. But
sure, but the difficulty right now, and I might agree with you, is the fact that Christianity has not found a way really to allow for a virtuous assertion of masculinity.
I think this is mostly to do just with the individualism in our society. So the problem is that if you go look at the masculinity of a couple hundred years ago, it was mostly communal masculinity. You are supposed to sacrifice and it had a lot to do with sacrifice. You're supposed to sacrifice yourself for others. But in our largely liberal society, where we're seen as, quote, individuals, unfortunately, that sense of sacrifice we don't really see it as a virtue anymore.
No, but this sort of has an obvious answer of why this is. The institutions we've created are non-loyalistic. You sacrifice sort of blindly for a corporation, you're going to get screwed over.
Yeah, the corporation.
The corporations, they can lay you off. Or like, okay, fine, we have a good quarter or whatever. Like, it's and if you do this right, if you sacrifice, and you go into it blindly, and you don't understand the situation you're in, you can end up. Well,
that kind of communal sacrifice doesn't really have a place in our society, and it's not a good thing, it's a bad thing, but it's also a thing that we have to keep in mind, because that kind of, you can't go back is what I'm kind of saying. It's not something that road isn't open to us anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying sacrifice yourself to some company or
I understand you're saying
to establish communities. Right now we need to establish families and basically that.
Yeah, but you can't just base it around some kind of communal sacrifice. Like it has to be something either more specific than that, or
the trust and loyalty has to come first, then the sacrifice. The sacrifice cannot be the leading edge.
Yeah.
Unless it's sacrificed directly to some holy purpose. Yeah, in that case, Jesus himself establishes the trust and loyalty. But it can't just be like, well, I hear a lot of this too, like from like older conservatives, where they're just like, let's get out there and do the hard work, and like it's just like, well,
but
do you know what the modern society does with hard work? Like, I mean, I'm not saying don't work hard. I believe in hard work as well, but I mean, if you're not careful with the institutions we have, they will eat your life up and leave you paying a bunch of bills. And it's also, I don't think that progressives won the culture war, and they didn't work harder than the conservatives did, right?
They worked smarter.
Sometimes I feel sometimes that a lot of the aphorisms that come out of, well, at least 20th century Christianity, they don't understand something fundamental. I feel like something fundamental is being left out. I feel that there is a lot of abdication of leadership that's been going on, and it's sort of like, I mean, like the easiest thing to say as a leader is hard work. I mean, hard work is hard to do, but it's easy to say, right?
Yeah.
Like
it's very easy to say, all we've got to do is keep pushing harder.
Yeah, like it's like a general going like, "What are your orders, sir?"
Charge!
Well, fight harder, fight harder.
Yeah, fight harder. No, like I've read a lot of
flank is a direction.
generals.
Retreat to this location is direction. Sally forth is a direction. Fight harder is just telling people to do the job that they're already doing. It's very easy to do and offers no information. And oftentimes I think that a lot of discussion that occurs inside what the sort of spheres that Christianity controls come down to not actual discussions of how we set things up to encourage virtue, but just invocations to do virtue in situations where people are naturally discouraged from being virtuous.
I've read a lot of biographies of generals. I have to say, not in any one of them have I ever heard the words "fight harder" uttered in reference to an order they've given.
Mm-hmm.
It's, so I mean, that should go to show you how ridiculous the idea that all we have to do is
work harder is the thing they would shout in like Soviet Russia of, well, comrade, just work harder, and then you can finally meet your quota if you just
work harder or fight harder is something that a Russian general would say.
Yeah.
This is, I think this comes down to, there's just been a fundamental mistake in Christian leadership. And I think this really calls for a new generation of people who view things radically different to take the reins.
Oh, I agree. But that too
do something really different. But I think we've probably belabored this one a bit. Do you want to go on to the next one?
Well, there's one more point that I'd like to make on.
Oh, go ahead.
It's that, if what we're saying we truly believe, then maybe what we should start focusing on is pushing out a lot of the old guard from these positions of leadership, if it's within our power.
That's my interest. I think that will naturally occur.
It'll occur naturally eventually, but I'm saying
once
this is what we truly believe, we should try to accelerate the process.
Will occur naturally once an open channel of communication exists between us and the old guard.
Yeah,
that is the necessary first step. And what I think people people who are thinking roughly in the same direction as we are need to start opening up these channels of communication. I really wish I had an opportunity to interview some of those people from the Federalist, and I eventually hope to get them on, and other people from organizations like this. I think they're amenable to talk, but I think once they enter into this conversation, I think they're going to discover a bunch of things. I think that they're going to confront questions that they've insulated themselves from. And I think this is going to change the dynamic, because there's people, we insulate ourselves from all sorts of questions, but we're simultaneously in the process of deceiving ourselves as well as everyone else. And I don't think that just because you confront them with a hard question they can't answer, they're going to naturally fold and give in to a diametrically opposed worldview. But the unanswered question nags at their psyche, and know it or not, they're going to start looking for an answer. But they need to hear the question first. Anyway, sorry.
That's fine.
Is that enough on that question?
Yeah.
Chad, I will be looking. You can feel free to ask me questions. Sometimes the ones the replies have not been very well spaced enough. Of course, I will answer super chats if you feel so inclined.
Give us money. We'll give him money.
Give us money.
I don't get any money.
Another thing on that masculinity topic. Another thing on that masculinity topic. I think that people's vision, their image of what masculinity is actually the exact opposite of what masculinity is, as is conceived in the Catholic tradition. Like not having a control over yourself and trying to hook up with as many women as possible. Like nowadays, that's seen as manly. That's actually showing a lack of control over oneself. That's actually effeminate. engagements
Well,
with
yeah,
behaviors.
but this is, I mean, it's kind of, there's two people who are celibate. There's people who have control over their desires, and there's people who can't attract the opposite sex, right? Like,
Yeah.
and the difficulty
That's
is,
not what he's saying.
I mean, the sexual revolution has effectively merged those two categories and destroyed.
They appear to be the same.
They appear to be the same. Yeah. Okay. And this is really dangerous because
yes.
At the same time that these two categories appear to be the same, the difficulty that men have with dating has increased a lot. The relationship between the sexes generally have collapsed, or not collapsed, but have been really harmed by modern developments. So
tell me about it.
Yeah. Hey, is that Catholic wench?
Yes, that was her.
I think we.
But somebody else has a high pitched voice.
No, Todd Lewis is not on the stream.
Todd Lewis.
Or Pius.
The damage is done for.
Do not compare Todd Lewis's voice to my fiance, please.
Oh, we're gonna keep doing it.
I never forgive you for that.
In fact, Reactionary Expat, who's in the chat, next time you make a video, response to the
no. Okay, I think Catholic wench and I model perfectly good gender relations, but
I follow you around like a Roomba vacuum.
Are you commenting? Okay, I'm not very organized. You're right, but you are very clean. So,
well, I actually picking up after you gives me a sense of purpose and duty. I actually enjoy it. But no, the reason why I was like, oh, tell me about it was because the guys I dated before I met you were just awful. Right?
They were Canadian, weren't they?
Oh,
well, that explains everything.
Well,
I imagine all Canadian men is Justin Trudeau now.
I feel like it's accurate.
Okay, well, black and white thinking's lazy thinking, distributist. My point is that
I only think in black and white when it comes to Canadians. You guys all are the same.
They only got 2 colors on their flag, so I only think in 2 colors.
Yeah, red and white thinking, I guess.
I'm about to like slam my head against a wall unless we get to another topic.
Oh, okay. Let's.
Well, hold on. I want Catholic wench to finish her like. You really don't like us making fun of Canadians, friends.
No, I don't like this cutesy talk.
Okay.
I'm about to throw.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, okay. Canadian jokes aside. Okay, well, I think we all agree that this is a problem, but I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. I guess when I thought of these questions, I imagined that there'd be like a progressive talking to us, like
if only Christy Winters was here.
Oh yeah, or ContraPoints.
I'd like to have one.
We're competing with a ContraPoints live stream where they're drinking like mimosas, like with Darren Meyer or whatever.
I don't even know if that's gay anymore because I'm not sure which way everybody's going.
We are able to enjoy functional organs.
Okay.
Why did you have to go there? Why did you have to make it
weird?
weird?
Next point or something?
What?
Yes, let's move on to the next point before Fritz makes it weirder.
Yeah, this is getting really weird for me. Okay. Okay, regardless of what cultural order replaces our own, the progressive formula of uninvested pseudo-empathy and virtue signaling will be suppressed. The modern progressive form is harmful to society in a singular way. I know, I believe this totally. I don't think that there can be people like modern progressives in a functioning society.
I mean, we talked about this, like, to bring it to something we've talked about is like Star Trek, where at least the first 2 series, or even just the world itself, the sort of progressive utopia that Roddenberry envisioned is somehow led by these romantic, alpha male, sort of perfect humans like Captain Kirk, Picard, and Cisco. But progressive, if you look at they're
supremely masculine. But I'm talking more about the role the progressive person plays in society. And I know the architect of this SJW has been much commented on, but Oh man, I keep on encountering it, and it's amazing, right? It's just pseudo empathic virtue signaling. It creates this sort of internalized moral logic that's just totally inverted, and I think it's just corrosive to social relations.
Yeah.
And I don't think it has anything to do with the vision of the progressive society, although I think that's harmful too.
Well, no, the individuals themselves are toxic, even without their ideals. At least to my mind.
Pardon me?
I said that the personality of the individuals themselves seem toxic to me, despite not even despite their ideals, but just leaving their ideals aside.
Yeah.
They seem like just terrible people.
If they were if they were conservatives or reactionaries, I'd be like, okay, man, like just if someone tried to like get on top of like I know if someone was like hovering around me constantly, making sure that like I didn't cross myself in the wrong direction, and then like waiting to nail me, and then like asking for like a recognition of that grievance, and then like claiming to empathize with everybody, like I don't think that would be functional regardless of what ideology it was attached to.
Mm-hmm. It's not healthy, and it's just plain irritating. I mean,
also the same way that, you know, you go on social media, and I know we all know progressives don't care about being hypocrites, but just the sheer like nastiness that these people, you know, display towards their political opponents is things you would never see. You never see this by conservatives. I've you know, the way it just seems to the mindset of this. There's something just also just pathological and just slimy about a lot of these people. How, you know, the fact that this empathy is completely fake, considering that it's only directed towards specific people that you know, they want essentially money from, or they want sympathy from. Considering the way
maybe this is, I guess I'm wondering right now if there's a question to what degree this is born of social media, and what to degree this is born of a particular development in progressivism itself.
Dave, you have a super chat. Do you want me to read it for you?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'll read the super chats. So Red 6UA said, "Would you say you are a conservative con on economics?" I would say I dislike the label of conservative. I think that's two questions. I'll answer them both. I would say I don't like the label conservative. I think it's misleading, and it's associated with a movement
people who cry on
which I think are really, it's a dead movement, right? And I wouldn't call myself conservative because I'm opposed to a lot of ways modern society operates. Would a conservative who wants to completely uproot enormous numbers of social institutions be conservative? I know what I'd be conserving.
Mm.
And so I think the label is singularly not useful for me. And I think there's a second question over whether I subscribe to conservative economic theory. I think it's important to understand the Hayekian and Milton Friedman criticisms of socialism. But I think it's also important not to be wed to these criticisms. And I think the economic question is quite secondary at the end of the day, relative to who can speak, where, and with what authority, which I think is the fundamental question.
What does it matter how rich your society is if everybody is miserable and
killing themselves?
Killing themselves.
What does being a rich society mean?
But yeah, that's another.
I mean, for me, it's like, frankly, if the economic
is material wealth actually wealth?
I would have, the thing is, you know, tampering with economic systems, though, I'm always very wary of, considering the fact that, especially now when these supply chains and, you know, our massive populations completely dependent on, you know, supply chains being completely available and having massive production of food. I understand food is actually fairly inexpensive and easy to produce now in massive quantities, but, you know, I've always been very wary of adjusting economic models. But so when it comes to richer,
does that mean though, Fritz? Does that mean that we would just stay at the status quo for fear of disrupting a supply chain? I mean,
No. I think it's just a concern. It's always a concern of mine of, disrupting the status quo too much could lead to, breaking up the supply chains, and that could lead to a lot of economic
Well, the supply
issues.
chains don't affect food too much. The thing they affect is manufacturing.
Well, it depends on what.
But what I'm really interested to see is how 3D printing will affect manufacturing.
maybe less than you think. I mean, 3D printing offers to create sort of sub-economies, which I think is interesting. But it's never going to offset manufacturing in terms of low-cost products.
Well, no, but I think what it could be is it could become a supplement that sort of shrinks supply lines in many ways. Like, for example, a lot of like small, tiny parts are made in far off places and shipped en masse.
It'll put Games Workshop out of business. Those bastards.
Yes, 3D printing would certainly put, and I hope it does put Games Workshop out of business. But I mean,
And I don't know why I dislike that company so much, considering I don't think I've ever bought
because
a
it deserves it. That's why you just like
it's just the $60 figurines. I've never bought one, and I still am like, oh my god.
My brother has bought so many of them, and I have told him how disappointed I am that he spent that money on it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, people have hobbies. I have hobbies, right? It's a
trash hobby. But
okay. I mean,
I guess that's my subjective opinion on.
This sort of gets into the whole subject of my nerd culture series, which is, are these things like video games and board games being my particular vice, if you want to call it that? Are these things that need to be abandoned altogether, or is there a way of doing them right? Is there a way of
we need to
incorporating
burn
them in a healthy way, and maybe even using them to, explore new ideas? I don't know.
But I don't really think we have the choice to abandon them, which is, I mean, unfortunately.
I think we've gotten off topic here.
Yeah. Well, I'll go on
we've gone way off topic.
I'll go on to the next one. I'm going to skip number 7 because it's stupid, and we've already discussed sexual revolution. So I'm going to go on to number 8 and 9, which are one question. For all but the most risk-averse, high IQ individuals, STEM careers provide a poor return on investment. And then the next one is STEM skills like programming, physics, project management, drafting, etc. should be things taught to any reasonably educated individual. Reactions.
I agree. It sounds. I think that if you're going to get even a liberal arts degree, you should have some level of STEM training.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think
certainly programming. I think programming is going to become very.
Well, I just think that we need to go put these topics in at the high school level.
Well, that's true too. I think that would be certainly useful, but I mean, I'm not a big fan of public school or the idea.
I think we need to nuke public schools, in my opinion. But
yeah, I'm entirely with Mathoma on this one.
Well, Intermezzo and Mathoma, you guys are both experts on these topics, right? You guys are both big into the math and programming. In some sense, I am too.
Yeah, Dave, you have expertise in this subject. You have a lot.
I'm going to completely stay out of this.
Oh, well, no, Fritz. I mean, you this
some
is
expertise.
Wait, just a second. Can we flip this and say all the arts classes should be mandatory for high school or be taught to anyone who's reasonably educated?
Well, I agree with that too. I think that in order to
reform significantly, but I still think they should be.
Well, I think in order to be a well-rounded person, you have to have some training in arts, science.
So this is my opinion. I think that there are some necessary things that you need to know, like how to balance a checkbook, like how to do like basic mathematics to a certain degree, how to do some programming, etc., etc. And these should be the required classes at the high school level.
Mm-hmm.
Then you do have your option of what you are interested in. And I do think that it is good to take those classes, but you need to make sure that you can have you need to make sure that you have an education so that you can actually keep your life in order, regardless of what career you take.
Well, I've become sort of suspicious, a lot of these engineering jobs they're just sort of like nose to the grindstone type jobs. They require a certain threshold of programming and physics understanding. But I think the level that they require is more or less accessible to everybody.
Oh, I agree.
And so, you end up, going through this whole idea of becoming an engineer. And, I've got several engineering degrees myself, but I'm just questioning, like, well,
They're actually worth.
Really what we want is we want someone where you can just tell them, make this thing, and they know how to go about making it, right? Like, you could tell what engineering really teaches you, right? It really teaches you to go like, so you go to me and go, distributist, I want I want you to build me a bookcase, or like from scratch, or I want you to program me a video game from scratch. Like, what's good about engineering, more or less, is that I've no idea how, I've never done either of those two things. Oh, I've made a video game from scratch, but it's been years, right? Like I'm not like, it's not immediately coming to me how to do that. But the real skill of engineering is that you don't need to, right? You can structure the project in a way that if you work at it and set reasonable goals, you'll be able to eventually get through with some kind of finished product. And that's the only skill that I think that could be rightly called engineering. And it's something that I think everyone should have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps almost everyone. I mean,
like everyone who has like, reasonably high IQ, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention, that I'm slightly elitist when it comes to
for some people that may be out of reach.
Yeah, I don't think everyone at the high school level, say in 9th or 10th grade or 11th or whatever, that they have the facility to do things like learn calculus or learn physics or anything like that. I think most people can. Maybe the upper 50%, which is just to say everyone with an IQ above 100 could probably do something like that. But I wouldn't have too much confidence in, say, an IQ of someone has an IQ of something like 80 learning multivariable calculus.
Yeah.
In certain ways, it's like, what's the actual need for certain people do not need to learn calculus to be able to actually have a sustainable career.
Well, I will say that the beauty of learning calculus is not in its practicality, because we have computers that can calculate all the calculus for us. We don't actually need to know how to do it. The beauty of calculus is that it's kind of more of a pursuit where you learn problem-solving skills. You learn how to look at a problem and analyze it and break it down and kind of construct a solution for the problem.
Oh, you can even do that with the arts as well. It doesn't specifically have to be mathematics or STEM things like that.
I think the reason why calculus is held up as a thing is that in Western history, calculus was the location where the physical sciences met with the purely abstract mathematics in a very, very real way, in a seemingly complete way. And as such, the mastery of that or the knowledge of that indicates that you're somewhat invested in that perspective, I guess.
I guess that's right. Even though that has been a theme in the entire history of mathematics. Like if you look at Archimedes, certainly he was a great mechanist too. Besides a great abstract thinker, like he did all sorts of invents all sorts of things. I think like the Archimedes screw. I mean that's my general theme, but I do agree that calculus is one notable example where those two meet.
I agree I agree with Intermezzo. It's purely symbolic, but it's a symbolic for a reason, right?
Distributist.
Yes.
Can you expand upon something for me? You mentioned that these STEM careers don't have a return, good return. What do you mean by that?
So I guess I've moved in my life design from being someone who thought that what you really want is like the career that earns you the just under the six figure, which is like what most engineers make in Silicon Valley, and then you just plug away at that. But nowadays, I think that if you're not risk averse, the smartest thing to do is to work a good job and get a paycheck, and then on the side do all sorts of crazy projects that might hit it big. and one or two of them will explode and make you like a good amount of money, and that this is what people do who aren't risk averse, and that most of these, because there's this lot of people who just like, they have shit programming jobs in Silicon Valley and they plug like 80-hour work weeks into them easy. Right. And they're worried that like somebody in India is going to take their job from them. Like, that's not a way to live. It's not even smart.
Or they're going to say the slightly wrong, politically incorrect thing and they get fired.
Well, probably less so, and these people don't really have a lot of politically incorrect opinions to speak of. But you know, the point is that you're laboring at this highly competitive job market where, I'm not going to mince words, like a lot of people are trying to get into this job market as well. And it just seems like something fundamentally is being done wrong. I you know, to me it seems like something, I mean, you know, a lot of the people, I worked for more than a few years in industry in a variety of jobs. And, you know, a lot of the people who I was working with, they just had no imaginations whatsoever, right? And no real ability to think outside of boxes. But, you know, in a lot of ways, they probably were more focused at getting lines of code into a machine without problems, right? You know, it strikes me as something that might not be a great thing to participate in, but I still believe that knowing how to program a computer is really important, because I've used it many times before. I actually kind of wanted to read a quote from this one, from Robert Heinlein. I think this is from Starship Troopers, where he says a human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch a maneuver, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects. I don't know. This is a little bit false, but, you know, sometimes in our highly specialized global economy, I'm not sure that you necessarily want to be someone who's...
Well, that's the thing. How do you make people want to, or even want to have the discipline to learn how to do all these things when they're so focused on their own needs that they're just going to specialize in something?
Well, that's what the corporate system in some sense is demanding. I mean, like, specialization works great for global corporations because you're incredibly developed on them. Like, I worked in manufacturing, and there were people who trained for 3 years to use one machine.
And
like one machine.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Not even one type of machine, like one machine that came from a manufacturer in Japan.
And if that machine gets replaced,
yeah. Well, I mean, presumably the company has loyalty to retrain these people, and you know, presumably the next machine is going to work something like the next one. But maybe it won't. And you know, then essentially what you're doing is counting on the loyalty of an institution that by its very nature is not loyal.
Well,
so.
Those kind of institutions sort of make people into, you know, robots essentially. Which is, I mean.
Okay, I'll just go on. I think we've exhausted that one.
Yeah, you know, it's.
Okay. So much of the wisdom provided to us by the generations that immediately preceded us, aka the baby boomers, is wrong due to an overvaluation of accreditation and material possessions and an undervaluing of time, space, flexibility, and risk-taking.
And this is an unpopular opinion?
Okay, yeah, I guess none of these are unpopular opinions. I should have done. These are just my opinions, but I can't have like I really need these are directed at certain types of people, like, you know.
Well, who is that directed at? Old people?
I'm not sure you're going to find too many people here who are going to defend the boomer ideas.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll go on.
Maybe we got Buckley on.
Yeah, Buckley.
Okay, here's an unpopular opinion. I'm skipping over gender and sexuality aren't real, because I don't think anyone believes that here either. Okay, here's my most unpopular opinion. Chipotle is good.
Yeah, that's
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Good for
Really?
what,
Yeah. I like Chipotle.
I enjoy it.
I'm
Spot
too skinny and I need the calories, therefore I like it.
Yep. So this was an unpopular opinion, but you were wrong.
Oh God. Okay.
That's
let's
where
go
I'm
faster here.
Batman.
Okay, here we go. Number 13. Jocks are by and large much more emotionally mature than their nerd counterparts. Women are right to prefer them.
That's
Yes.
right. Yep.
I agree with this as well.
Sorry, I totally didn't go for a jock, Dave.
Okay, I'm
for
not
a violent
jock,
player.
but like I'm not. Would you consider me a nerd?
Yes.
Dave, you have failed. You have failed at everything you've ever tried.
But
We're gonna have to shove you in a locker now.
I have sports hobbies.
No, sorry. Okay, I'm trying to avoid cutesy talk. Yes, you're actually pretty good at sports, and you're pretty, intellectually.
I've got a little bit of a thesis beer belly here, but
Yeah.
Beer. I miss you, beer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not that I'm drinking beer during Lent, but you get the idea. I mean, I guess if you asked me in high school, I'd definitely say I was a nerd.
Yep. You know what, too? This is also why sports are, I think, a part of a good education, too.
Yeah.
A lot of smart people,
yeah.
like when I was in public school, a lot of intelligent people would make fun of people who are good at sports. They would say that, oh, well, look at me. I can do calculus. I can take derivatives. But look at you. You can do something totally useless, like run around a track, whereas they totally missed the point of sports.
What I want is I want like the PE class, if everybody's aware of it, I want that banned, and I want sports to be mandatory.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is like get rid of PE, but force everybody to have to take up a sport. They can choose.
Yes, and they must take a sport all 4 years. No sport 1 year.
And it has to be competitive.
And it has to be competitive, exactly.
Yeah, I think this is another thing too. You need to learn how to lose, and you need to learn how to try really hard and then lose still.
Yeah.
That's one thing that every jock learned by the time he was 16 that almost none of the nerds I knew in high school learned. Every jock knew that he could run as hard as he possibly could and still lose the race. Yeah. Almost none of the nerds learned that until well into their 20s.
What does this have to do with female attraction, though?
Well, women want emotionally mature men.
Right.
Unless we're wrong about that, in which case we have to.
I'm afraid if the thesis goes away.
It depends on the woman, actually.
You want one neurotic guy?
Wait.
Women want a provider.
Mature women want. I think I fixed the problem, guys. We don't have to break everything now.
I think Coach Red Pill wants on. But
Coach, you have me on a live stream.
But yeah, the reason why is jocks know how to try something and lose.
I mean, even in my experiences, like the people, like the whole idea of like the jock as being like what you say in your Nerds Culture series is this sort of the boneheaded evil the boneheaded sociopathic, barbarian. It really wasn't true. Most of the jocks, again, you're completely right, that I knew in high school that I was sort of like afraid of talking to because I thought they were like, it's like when I actually started talking to them in like my senior year, we actually got along really well because we actually had a lot more in common because like they actually ended up just being fairly nice, just decent people. That actually worked very hard and, did all these extracurricular activities that required a lot of effort.
I'll be honest, I'm fairly sure the jock stereotype doesn't actually exist in real life. I think it's just a meme.
It depends. It depends.
It's a creation of nerd culture.
I'm sure.
I've never met anybody like that.
So I actually went to a college where there was a significant like D1 football team, and I'll tell you, like amongst many of those members, it was a complete true stereotype.
Well, I'm sure the average IQ in the room wasn't that high, but I think.
Did they not watch a lot of Rick and Morty?
No, but they were kind of. I would say that many of them were abusive to their girlfriends, and they would just try to have sex with as many people as they could. They
You got
wouldn't
a
go to
super chat.
classes.
I think
Yeah, I'm
that's
gonna
more
let
function
Code
of-
Red pull on. Just give me a second.
You also got a super chat.
Yeah,
Here,
I'll get to it.
I'll
Give
read
me a
it.
second.
Have you cleaned your room, Dave?
Well,
I cleaned your room.
Oh, all
But-
right.
Boom.
But I will say, I do think it's
Question
kind of,
answered.
it's just kind of hard to argue like in such a general term. I think for most jocks, most jocks are probably better adjusted than most nerds, but there are some subsegments depending upon how physically gifted they are.
Yeah, I mean it's it's an interesting, it's a dynamic that I think was played up by Hollywood, but is, it's
We
sort
could
of
say it's rarer
transparently-
than is made, or that one is made to think.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know. I've heard conspiracy theories about the Revenge of the Nerds, but I'm not going to repeat them.
At least not on air.
Yeah, no. Blah 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 blah. Where were we?
Well, here's a wonderful idea from the chat. Only let CRP on if he sends a super chat.
Well, wait, what was the super chat? Okay. The super chat was from the Inquisitor. Have you cleaned your room?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that is the, well. Okay. I don't know if I'm really the topic of Jordan Peterson's clean your room thing, but that's fine. Okay. And next, unpopular opinion. Okay. The same property that might make race realism true, highly mutable human genetics, is the quality that could save multiracial societies through incentivizing the fecundity of high trust, highly productive individuals.
I don't
Okay.
think you believe that yourself, do you?
Well, okay, this is a conditional statement because I have vowed never to take a position on race realism outside of what a particular expert is telling me. If a particular expert tells me that has a PhD that's like studied in this and tells me that this is true, I'll nominate whatever the expert says. But this strikes me that if it is true, then genetics are so mutable in human populations that essentially incentive structures that society erects could be used to essentially encourage the human cultures and human lineages to be more, as people in the alt-right would say, K-type.
Are you hold on. If I'm interpreting this correctly, are you saying if people embrace race realism, then that would help with survival or something, or the survival of who they are, or the thriving of who they are?
No. So race realism is just that there are marked genetic distinctions between human groups, right?
Basically, that the races are different genetically, and those
if that's true,
display outward.
If that's true,
and manifest in real differences between them.
If that's true, then it means that the human race has a highly malleable gene pool. And it also means that these changes that we like so much come from essentially traditional Western societies. That's really, I don't know. There's not much I can say about this since I'm not an expert. It just strikes me as something that's...
this is something that I think most people just simply won't buy, because too many people put their worth on where they came from. I mean, that's why like Ancestry.com and 23andMe are like really booming, because people really want to know where they came from. And I think any sort of race realism studies being shoved down their throat, it just... If it's shown that any one race is somehow inferior than the other, then I think on a personal level, these people won't really deal with it very well. They won't look at it with curiosity and wow, this is amazing. As human beings, we're so diverse. This is amazing. People would see that as, oh, great, now people are going to step on me, or people are going to gang up on me because I'm different, or blah 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 blah. So I just think this is something that's really suppressed.
Someone in chat is saying that's called eugenics. Okay, I need to make this clarification because I had a professor of genetics on about a month ago on this channel talking about human gene pools changing over time. as a fact is not eugenics. Eugenics is the explicit manipulation of gene pools by human authorities. That is not the same thing as saying that societies have impact on gene pools as a fact. It's just not. I don't know what to tell you.
Geneticist to confirm this.
What?
I said we had an actual geneticist confirm this.
I don't know. I mean, essentially, it's saying that if we believe in any kind of genetic adaptation, then we have
that's
to.
Eugenics.
Then that's eugenics. Yeah. I just don't.
No.
I don't know how could you even do genetics as a Catholic then? Like, just describe things. I don't know.
You probably couldn't, to be honest.
And in a way, like, just to mention on that, something that I've sort of recently mulled over is, just thinking. I mean, I'm surprised I didn't think of it earlier. Is the fact that one of the reasons why you could argue from a genetic standpoint that Western culture, European culture, civilization has produced a lot more sort of great figures is you could argue a lot of it could be due to the fact that because of Christianity enforcing a monogamous sexual culture that had a much more, you could say, eugenic effect than polygamous cultures such as existed in the Islamic world, wherein you had increased larger numbers of inbreeding and lack of genetic diversity due to polygamy.
I mean, yeah, that was much less.
By to say that this is true or not, but I am fairly certain when I say this historical fact, true or not, recognizing it as if it's true. It being true does not force Catholics to be pro-eugenics.
Yeah.
And even the thing you described is not eugenics.
And this has to be a distinction. Otherwise, we turn a moral principle into an act of insane blindness to how societies might operate. Or maybe a priest can come on and correct me in this, and I'd be glad for the correction. But to me, I don't know how this is. How you can square the I mean, to me, it seems plausible, and I don't know. Again, I always feel really self-conscious talking about this stuff because I'm just not qualified to.
Well, you brought it up, bud.
Yeah, I did. It was part of the Unpopular Opinions,
Okay, next.
Majority of society will never be red-pilled in any meaningful sense.
This is probably true.
Yeah,
I agree.
Totally agree.
Okay, a lot of people on the dissident right think that people are gonna be red-pilled as a populist movement. It's never gonna happen.
Yeah, you can drop a giant red pill like a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, exactly.
Just
Past ages.
Everyone.
Well, you even run into another problem.
There's something else. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well,
Coach
here,
Redpill.
I'll just make my quick points. That you'll run into another problem, which is that what it means to be red pilled will shift over time as more people learn. Because I mean the term itself sort of implies a kind of select, or not exclusive, but sort of a small group of knowledge that is not widely accepted by society. So sort of in an ontological sense.
I mean, even to believe in a red pill, you have to believe that there is some kind of true knowledge that people en masse are not inclined to believe.
Well, that's true. That's true, and that's the whole point of the red pill. Is the red pill is looking at things as they actually are. But the thing is that the society we're currently living in allows us the luxury of ignoring certain data points that we find uncomfortable for different social, moral, or political reasons. And so our wealth and our affluence allows us to be blue-pilled. The poorer you are, the more red-pilled you become. The more aggrieved and abused you are, the more red-pilled you become. If you're living in the laps of luxury, you can afford to live under a happy delusion.
I kind of disagree. I do think that many folks who live in poverty are also they're not necessarily red-pilled. They're just
but they can explain their poverty by their blue-pilled mentality. I mean, think of a lot of SJWs. A lot of SJWs are living under the yoke of the student debt situation, which is really a construct of the government in collusion with financial sectors and investors and college administrators to pump up the cost of universities to keep this gravy train for them all going, right? And a lot of these colleges graduate these SJWs who are flat broke all the time and debt slaves, and they continue believing their SJW nonsense because it's a comforting lie.
Well, I think the two are separate and not connected. I sort of they were going to believe what they believe regardless, and then I think that the systems just extract money from them regardless of what they believe. Like the university system doesn't care really what you believe, at least on the face of it. Like the individual professors and administrators might care, but the system itself doesn't care what you believe. They'll take the money regardless of what you believe.
And I mean, I would say, especially that's been increasingly true because of the widespread implementation of mass communication, allowing culture to change more rapidly than it would have in previous age, and the need for institutions in industrial and post-industrial societies, you know, because 100, 200 years ago, I think for most people that would be on the dissident right, the average person would probably be considered red-pilled if they held opinions that, you know, our great-great-great-grandparents held today. It's the fact that, you know, the people that are actually in order to actually affect change, it's not really based on having these sort of populist movements of, well, if we could just sort of reveal this sacred truth to everybody. There's a liberal hiding under, there's a classical liberal hiding under the rocks everywhere. But, you know, this change takes time and it takes leadership. It takes people to slowly change culture and institutions over time that gets the average person to understand that, just sort of have a change in mindset of what is socially acceptable, because people like to take the path of least resistance. They like whatever is going to make them popular within their communities. And so right now, being dissident, not being risk averse is something that's not comfortable for them. And, you know, fair enough, there's reasons why they wouldn't be, but all I'm trying to say is that in the end, it's going to take. We don't really need to use populism, and we can't use populism. We shouldn't, to affect change, because this change comes from, you know, the blue pilling or the progressive takeover that came through the institutions, and I think it should be undone through the institutions.
Well, okay. Well, this is not nice. I think that these institutions, there's no way you're going to climb up the ladder that the progressives climbed up.
They burned the ladder after they got to the top.
No, I had a discussion with somebody else about this. There is no way. The progressives are very aware how they got to where they are, and they're not about to let an oppositional movement take the same route.
Insofar as the universities, you mean?
But insofar as institutions in general,
progressives dominate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they have different objectives too. I think the generation of, let's say, conservatives who were in academia, for instance, who sort of passed the baton over to progressives, they were willing to entertain new ideas. They were actually, ironically, quite open-minded, and they believed in a notion of fairness, if you like.
Well, they actually believed in the marketplace of ideas.
Well, yeah, they came from high trust society, right? So why?
And they were in pursuit of the truth and all of that kind of thing, whereas progressives are only interested in power. So they're playing a completely different game. So I agree. I don't think that it would be possible to engage in entryism into progressive institutions.
Setting up parallel institutions is something you could do, but
that's always really the amazing overhead, you know.
Yeah, well, that's the main problem, is that it just costs a damn much.
I think also that progressivism in general sort of like kills the goose that lays the golden eggs every time they manage to capture it. I mean, I'm looking specifically at media, which is my background, and for instance, serious literature used to be a big mover in the book market, but progressivism and what is, you know, culturally acceptable insofar as a progressive outlook. Insofar as literature is concerned, it's become more and more SJW and more divorced from the problems of people, and it shrunk the market for serious literature. The quote unquote literary books today are a fraction of the market used to be. Keep in mind, Ernest Hemingway used to be a bestseller. The Pulitzer Prize winners of the past were bestsellers. Eugene O'Neill, was a big deal, commercially speaking. But as progressives have taken over literature, serious literature, it's shrunk. And the same thing is starting to happen in film. Look at filmmaking today. The last Star Wars, it's rife with SJW nonsense. And it's worse. It performed worse. It performed catastrophically. And the only reason it's still in theaters is because Disney strong-armed the exhibitors rather, and forced them to have the movie on for, I think it was 8 weeks. If exhibitors had their druthers, they would have cut the movie after the second week, because attendance is cratering and it's hurting the exhibitors, the theater owners, right?
Well, in that particular example, the test will be in the next movie, right? But I think we're seeing sort of the conquest first and second law sort of play out, the oscillation created by the two of them.
Yeah, and it's a cyclical view of history, right? That good times create weak men, and eventually this will come full circle, but it has to go through this process first and fall in a heap, and then something will emerge from the ashes of that.
Coach Red Pill, how much of this do you think of the decline of the book, of the novel in the film industry, is more actually due to the rise of other forms of entertainment, such as TV shows and like really fast things that really get your dopamine rushing?
That's a really good question. I don't think that anybody can realistically ever know. But what I can say as a writer is, as a professional writer who was published by mainstream publishers, today the atmosphere is so SJW that it's impossible to publish. As a matter of fact, right now I'm getting ready. It's 8 a.m. here in Ukraine, and I'm getting ready to start my workday. I'm writing a book. Now, this is a book that I've been toying with for several years, and about 4 or 5 months ago, I decided to finish it. It's sort of like a magnum opus kind of thing. And back in 2014, I floated chunks of it to some publishers in New York and literary agents. And they were like, no, we can't publish this. No way. Because it talks about things that, the New York publishing scene does not want discussed. Now, your question is it that they don't want to publish this stuff that has shrunk the market, or is it, other media? I think it would probably be a combination. Of course, that there are other media that give people a bigger rush, but there are always and always will be people who love reading books, who love the all-enveloping experience of diving into a book. And those people are ill-served by the publishing industry today, but they have a stranglehold on serious literature, at least. And that's why so many brainy people are watching Breaking Bad and Mad Men and shows like that, because it gives brainy people something to chew on, because they don't have it in literature, because literature has just gone off the rails.
Well, see, I would think the opposite is the truth, but so what the way I see it is that sort of entertainment, like TV and to the extent internet streaming services have taken over have taken up the baton, I should say, of the mass market entertainment, and then things like the publishing industry and such have been reserved for the people who are more sort of interested in that sort of niche. The people who actually read books now are the people who like to read books instead of just.
Have you read some of this modern, like these modern literary works written by SJW?
I'm sure a lot of them are garbage, but
it's complete garbage. They literally have.
I don't read that much fiction.
I'm not even being hyperbolic. They have pictures of garbage in them because they're supposed to be statements of art.
What are we talking about in particular, if I may ask?
The Argonauts.
We talk about SJW
the Argonauts
novels. Like, is there one that came out recently that I might recognize? Like
the Argonauts. Oh, that's a classic.
When did it come out?
Oh, it came out. Let me find and read the first couple of paragraphs, because even in the beginning, it's horrifying.
I'm trying to think of what do people talk about? I mean, talk about like David Foster Wallace and I don't know. I mean, I guess he's a little bit more Xer, but while you find that, I'm just going to go on so we can keep this moving.
Yeah.
I'm going to skip the ones that are a little bit uncontroversial. Let's just go on to 19. I did a video on this, so it's kind of explored this. LARPing becomes less insufferable if the person doing it is really serious about it or really, really unserious about it.
I think we've talked about this to death.
We talked about this, but
Yeah, it's boring.
okay.
We have some sort of new people here. Let's see what expat or coach thinks about this.
Okay, I mean, fake it till you make it is sort of.
Well, there's a difference between fake it till you make it and LARPing.
Yeah, it's how serious you are about it.
Well, no, it depends on like how practical it is. Like, for example,
I suppose.
let me give you a very specific example. I remember the first time I ever had to deal with a room full of lawyers, and I wanted to get them to do something for me. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and so I started thought of somebody whom I had met once, who was a very gung-ho kind of businessman. And I started telling them, acting sort of like the guy. I even started, frankly, ripping off some of his terms of speech, right? And everybody there in the room nodded, and they did what I wanted. And so, I was faking it till I made it. And soon enough, I was like in the groove, okay?
Can I offer an alternative hypothesis? I broadly agree with the distributist's position on this, but I think there's something else too. I think it's to do with the degree to which people are narcissistic in their LARPing. When you get those guys who are sort of in the middle, I think those guys are extremely narcissistic. And what they're doing is not necessarily any more practical than a guy who decides to learn how to make medieval clothing or something like that, or a blacksmith. Yeah, I mean,
I'm thinking of all these things people do that are disciplines, but are not fundamentally useful in our industrial economy.
But I think the difference with those people is they're actually creating real art, if you like, that other people can appreciate. It's not purely about an expression of their own ego, though of course there's always that in art. Whereas the guy who runs around saying that he's an elf or something like that, that's pure narcissism. And so and there's nothing that an outsider can take from that other than that person's narcissism. And it's in purely on their terms.
And in a way, it's not about them. It's not so much about the product, or it's not so much about the thing itself that they're consuming because they like it. It's because they want to project something. They care more about what other people think about them, so they can show off that ego, as opposed to them actually liking the thing. That's why, again, you sort of see all these YouTubers where they have like their pristine collection of figurines on their desks, where it's like, any figurines I have are just like in a little like drawer on my desk, and if I ever like, I don't really care about them.
And it doesn't do anything for the outsider, for the observer.
This is, I think,
it's a symbol of status,
right? Like he has. I think the thing is sharing, right? Like an artist wants to share, perhaps an extension of his ego's view on reality, but it's still fundamentally something he, at the end of the day, brings to some other person and asks them to appreciate. Whereas a lot of these other forms, it feels like someone's trying to like draw me into their own little reality, regardless of whether I want to be there or not. And that's the same thing I feel with like a lot of transgenderism too. It feels like I'm being hijacked and taken forcefully into another person's reality. Like they're not even putting it forward. I mean, I hate to say this as a Catholic, but like, I mean, there's something fundamentally less, you see all like these, again, decadence of the early 20th century, which was the emergence of the drag queen, right? And there's something fundamentally less oppressive about someone putting something out there to share that might be fundamentally useless and perhaps even decadent. And then people trying to force you into conforming to a reality, and a delusional one at that. And, well, I don't know.
But says nothing about the human condition.
I look at it a completely different way. I look at it in the utilitarian sense of, like, for instance, am I pretending to be, just for the sake of argument, am I pretending to be a blacksmith and faking it till I make it so that I can actually produce, so I can actually shoe a horse? Or am I pretending to be a blacksmith so that people can say, "Oh, look at him. He looks so he looks like something."
Porque no las dos.
No, but
What?
when you observe somebody making horseshoes for a shoe horse, you can appreciate the craftsmanship and that sort of thing that goes into all of that, and the skill and so on, and you can. There's something that the observer can take from that is not. You can take it on your own terms because it's making a general comment about something, whereas the full-on LARPer, you have to do it entirely upon his terms, and you have to passively buy into his entire worldview or whatever it is that he's doing. There's nothing outside of him that you're getting.
No, I see your point. I see what you're going for. But my point is different. I suppose I'm looking at it from the point of view of the individual doing this activity, faking it till you make it, or LARPing. That the guy who's faking it till he makes it, he wants something out of the experience. He's not pretending just for the sake of pretending, just to inflate his own ego. He actually wants to accomplish something.
Of course, and the substance often matters because you can actually become a blacksmith. You can never become an elf.
Right. Well, yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. I suppose I'm thinking of specific tasks because I suppose what I'm thinking is that in everything that I've ever tried to do, in a very real sense, at the beginning, I was faking it till I made it. I wasn't LARPing in the sense of narcissistically trying to position myself as something. I was copying others and trying to internalize their attitude and demeanor so as to achieve something. It wasn't for the sake of pretending to be it, or so that I could think to myself, "Oh, now people think that I'm this or that." You see what I mean?
Of course, but isn't that a general statement about learning? I mean, that's that occurs with any kind of learning. A child trying to learn to walk is engaged in that process. Somebody trying to learn to play the violin is engaged in that process, or whatever it is.
Well, yeah.
But I wouldn't call those things
Okay. So what I think has happened is Coach is attached himself, or is attached too hard onto the concept of fake it till you make it. That was a phrase that I think might have been out of place. But when we're talking about LARPing, we're talking about sort of people doing things that are not necessarily useful in our society, but are still sort of at least they're done more for entertainment. So like for
this distinction
isn't it just a form of
hinging on
escapism?
In a way,
the
yes.
definition of useful. What is it, Catholic Wench?
Pardon?
Yeah, I mean,
What was it, Catholic Wench, she said?
I just said, isn't it a form of escapism?
well, it's their own thing, right? It's like there's a difference between someone who dresses up as an anime character and somebody who dresses up as a clown to perform at a children's birthday party or something like that.
Yeah.
No,
One's an act of service.
Yeah, but what about the anime character who dresses up just for a laugh with his friends? He's entertaining his friends, just like a clown would be entertaining.
I think that would be on.
So that's on the low end of the intensity spectrum.
Yeah, that's like if you like dressing up for Halloween or going to some costume party. Like if you do that, like you're not like trying to virtue signal like this is like some identity that I don't really understand, or it's like this is just for entertainment. I'm hanging out with friends. Let me just dress up as something. But
I think the better dichotomy would be the guy who dresses up as an elf and pretend, that he's an elf, and the guy who does HEMA, right? I think that's the kind of.
I think that I understand what you're saying now. You're talking about LARPers, and I think that therefore I would be inclined to the opinion: are you LARPing for the entertainment and amusement of your peers, or are you LARPing in order to escape your own mind? Because they're very. Well, yeah, but the thing is, see, when I dress up for Halloween, right, I want to amuse the people I'm going to be joining up at the party. And they, of course, are dressing up, and because in whatever costumes that they dress up as, in order to amuse me in turn, right? And we all recognize that we are, quote unquote, ourselves, but we're dressed up in foolish costumes just for our mutual amusement. But when I sit at home and I pretend that I'm an elf, and think to myself, have all my elvish thoughts and try to figure out the elvish language all by myself, and I spend hours and hours and hours at this activity and there's nobody else around, well, clearly we're talking about somebody who's trying to get out of their own skull, of like escape their own mind or their own
but I mean, the person who's doing HEMA is also trying to escape their own mind, just in a different way.
I don't know what that is.
What's that?
Historical European martial arts.
So I think I'm going to move us off of the LARPing.
Yeah.
I want to get. My goal is to get to 25, just so I could kind of get to a round number. I'm going to skip over some that I don't think are very interesting. Okay, how about? Well, this is not controversial. How about 23? Michael Knowles, I suspect, is a giant animatronic puppet operated via levers by a mini-me version of Jonah Goldberg.
Wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Michael Knowles?
Michael Knowles, K-N-O-L, yes?
He's the guy that did the what is the alt-right thing for Prager University and has the he's got like a Daily Wire show that's just the most bland pablum you could imagine. I don't know.
And a blank book. Don't forget the blank book.
Yeah, he came to prominence because he went to Yale and wrote a book with no words in it called Reasons to Vote Democrat.
Oh, God. Oh, God. Okay, so
it was a bestseller.
That book was like, he spilled all the content of his mind in that book, I see.
Yeah, it's just... the existence of Michael Knowles as a figure on the type of right wing that Ben Shapiro was trying to pioneer makes me despair of any hope that there is something to salvage from the modern conservative movement.
But it certainly makes me think a lot less of Ben Shapiro.
I know, like Ben Shapiro thought Michael Knowles, like he's got no content, he's got no perspective, he's bland.
Well, for a second, I thought that you were talking about Mike Rowlands or
No.
Mark Rowlands, the leftist YouTuber.
If you're interested in getting like a perspective on his way of thinking, look at his "What is the alt-right" video on PragerU.
I think really that's
I mean, I consider myself a critic of the alt-right, but. I was cracking up. Like he was doing like this sort of rhetoric where he was like, what is the alt-right an alternative to? Well, the alt-right's the alternative to the modern conservative movement, just like another notable alternative, progressivism.
Oh, God. Oh, God.
Yeah. He literally pulled horseshoe theory. It was
horseshoe theory. Yay.
Dinesh D'Souza model politics.
Remember, there's every political order I don't like, and then there's boomers for Reagan.
Yeah.
I mean, Dinesh D'Souza was a conservative in the 90s. Michael Knowles is our generation. Like, there's a certain amount of disingenuousness here. I mean, he's seen the same things we have. He knows how this works. He knows that there's no path to get this perspective into the mainstream. He knows that this is a dead end. He thinks he can somehow smirk his way into some kind of restoration of America. I mean, the whole thing is going to collapse in on itself.
I mean, this is the thing is like, I don't know what it is, but is PragerU becoming increasingly designed to piss everyone off, not just like that guy?
They've got
Benson
some good
video
videos here and there, but
I guess our mutual friend Ben McLean made an excellent video, in my opinion, of a takedown of Guy Benson, a homosexual quote unquote Christian conservative on PragerU, who basically like he almost certainly is like I would not be surprised if he was an actual progressive plant, because he's basically he's the embodiment of like conservative supplication to progressivism. It's like, hey, here's and it's just like the utter contentlessness of conservatism at this point. Of here's a guy that has no real understanding of like actual moral values or principles, but hey, apparently all conservatism can be boiled down to is fiscal responsibility and low taxes and a large military budget. It's like,
this reminds me.
Let me rally behind this.
Yeah, I was going to say this reminds me of a great meme. It's a Republican in a suit saying the Democrats are the real racists, and the next panel is a Republican who dressed basically as one of those land whale SJWs with the pink hair and a tattoo that says "Die, cis scum." It says the neo-Leninists are the real transphobes.
Yeah.
I thought that sort of perfectly embodies modern conservatism.
Well, isn't it just that this is merely an expression of them being 10 years behind progressivism? So of course there would be a gay Christian conservative.
I mean, and the other thing is
that homosexual rights have always been a conservative position.
The thing that I'm curious about insofar as progressivism and conservatism and all that is right now all the mainstream political parties and you can go pretty far left and pretty far right, they all agree on neoliberal economic policy. And what I'm interested in is when will the SJWs kind of like confront neoliberal economic policies and begin to seriously critique it to create the break within the left, and also when is it that in the right
never
start doing the same?
Yeah,
they benefit too much from these massive
never because at the point neoliberal policies are the only thing that can generate the amount of wealth that would allow the SJW to exist as a social concept.
I'm not talking about the practical reality of it. I'm talking about when is it as a political thing that SJW is going to say, hey, these people believe in neoliberalism, so let's go against neoliberalism.
Communists, like hardcore Marxists, will do that. But the people that we think of as SJWs, like the dye, cis, scum, purple hair people, they will never think in that direction because
those people are not actual communists.
Let
me ask the group the following question.
We see the pets of the globalists, whether or not they're the pets of the left.
Suppose that, look, everybody says that there's going to be some sort of serious recession, serious crash in the near-term future. It's actually been close to 10 years since the last recession. And the economy over the last 10 years has really not grown very well, at least in the Western democracies. It's sort of like just tread water for the past 10 years, and a crash is on its way. Suppose that there is such a crash that's really serious, that things are really, really bad economically speaking. Do you think that then progressivism will sort of like break from that the commies will start to take over the progressives, at least in economic?
They can't though, because it's in direct opposition to all of their identity politics. See, people often think that things like really restrictive immigration policies were implemented and championed by the right in the early part of the 20th century. They're actually championed by the labor movements in the West because they saw foreign labor as being in direct competition with them. And the modern
they didn't want to lower the wages.
Yeah, and so the modern left has essentially completely surrendered to neoliberal economic politics. But for them to backtrack on that, they would have to start talking about all sorts of nationalism and even racialist ideas, and they're not going to do that. They can't.
Or at the very least,
open borders, but we're going to protect local labor. You can't do that. That's a direct contradiction.
I emailed a bunch of communists to try to get them onto this stream because it would have been much more interesting than me preaching to the choir in a lot of regards. But one of several of the people I haven't followed them on Twitter because I've been off of Twitter recently, and I've noticed that a lot of these communists have been forced to say things in very rehearsed fashion, as if they were reading off of a statement. The revolution will not solve homophobia. The revolution will not stop. Getting rid of capitalism will not stop sexism. Et cetera, et cetera. Getting rid of implementing socialism will not dismantle white supremacy. These statements indicate that the communists are essentially bending a knee to the identitarians.
Basically, this sort of demonstrates that what you think, the situation you posited, Coach Redfield, is probably not very likely. Just because it seems for the moment that the identitarian wing is taking precedent.
Is in control.
Yes, over the economic one.
Oh, by the way, parenthetically, I just want to mention to you, like sort of like gossip, I suppose, that I had a live stream with Christy Winters the other day.
I saw part of that.
Yeah. And then after the fact, she just talked a lot of shit about me. I just really kind of nasty shit.
Wow.
Are we unsurprised?
That's kind of your MO, right?
Is it because you didn't really challenge yourself enough? You didn't find the best positions to argue against?
No. She was like, I was very interested in her or somebody from Antifa giving me a set standard as to when Antifa or the far left consider it is appropriate to deplatform somebody and when it is inappropriate. And I kept trying to pin them down, and I spoke with several of them, and they kept, saying, "Oh, it's contextual. It depends on the context." Okay, well, tell me the context, because, like, for instance, there in the law there are very clear parameters insofar as murder, when murder is acceptable and when it is not, when it is, murder and when it is justifiable homicide or homicide in self-defense or what have you. So I just wanted to know, what's that line?
Yeah, we'll never guys try to answer from them. You never will. It's funny because I
tried to nail her. Hang on a second. The fact that I tried to nail her, she started calling it after the fact that it was a rhetorical trick that I was using, of like constantly trying to get that. How is that a rhetorical trick? It just really pissed me off. It was like, what the fuck?
Asking simple, direct questions is a trick.
Well, yeah. The mistake you made was believing they were arguing in good faith, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Sophists just complaining about sophistry.
Well, I think
the
question is not sophistry. The question is because these people, and regardless of whether they're arguing in good faith, these people believe what they're saying. So the question is, how do we come to an understanding of how these people's minds work? Because if we understand how the SJW mind works, you can understand exactly when they do and do not break off from the progressive coalition.
Okay.
Right.
Good.
Well,
one theory is that they just get their ideas formatted on them by their, incoherent radical professors and their pawns. But maybe not, right? I mean, there's a lot of intelligent people that's about this stuff. So can it all just be, as incoherent as it sounds?
Well, it's a progressive. It's a religion, and just like several religions are incoherent.
No, but
that doesn't change the question, right?
No, Christy Winters, for instance, I think that she believes this shit. I think that she's fundamentally smart enough to realize that a lot of her positions are incoherent, but she her social life and her professional life depends on her believing this shit. So
Christy Winters is a poor example because I've questioned how much of this stuff she believes. There are true believers, though. We agree on that, right? Go ahead. Yeah, it's Pat.
Isn't there something really obvious that everyone's missing? What's the motto of Antifa? By any means necessary, right?
Right.
So that explains it. They're going to do whatever they need to do. If they need to tell the truth, they'll tell the truth. If not telling the truth will allow them to achieve their ends, then they won't tell the truth. That there's not going to be any consistency other than by any means necessary to achieve power.
Okay, so from your point of view, it's the whole ideology is just an ideology bullshit. They don't even believe that it's strictly in order for them to achieve power.
Some do. There always is. There always, but probably those at the top are sociopathic.
Right? But I would say most of these three.
Got an echo going here.
Oh, sorry about that. Better?
Yeah. I think so. Oh.
No. So you all feel blackjacks.
Everyone have headphones on?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Let us all speak one by one. Coach Red Pill.
Okay.
We're almost done here.
I completely lost track of what I was talking about. But I guess my bottom line is like Christy Winters is just a fucking bitch. She was like so nice and all polite and shit. And then, and she was like all sweet. Oh, do you mind if I mirror the live stream we did? And I was like, sure, why not? And then, she started talking shit about me. And I'm like, fuck her,
But she was
the point. I appreciate that, but the point that I care about is not what the nature of Christy Winter's soul is. My desire is to figure out what the psychological dynamic of this group of people is, because I don't think we do understand it. If we did understand it, we would be able to create wedges very easily.
Well, which people are you talking about? Because there's a difference between the leaders and the rank and file.
Well,
I think the leaders,
Coach, you can unmute yourself at any time.
They're purely concerned with power, and the rank and file. Some of those people think that they're going to become the leaders. And what's that the Gervais principle. Have you ever looked at the Gervais principle?
Like Ricky Gervais?
Yeah, it's a guy wrote a blog about it's all about that the office and how that demonstrates the sort of the three groups: sociopaths. There are these guys in the middle who are sort of clueless, and then there are the losers.
Okay.
And it's all about power dynamics within human groups and the way the three different groups interact. I think the Gervais principle really explains a lot of this.
What are the three groups?
So there are these sociopaths who are, they play everyone off against each other, and they rise to the top and so on. Then there's a middle group of people who really think that they're actually doing something, but they're pretty clueless. They're fairly socially inept. And then there are these guys who are just losers, and they're just sort of along for the ride, and they don't really put in that much effort. And I think that a lot of these people, they are true believers. Some of them think they're going to get to the top, and so they try to play all of those games. And then there are actually people who really do run the show. And I think they're different groups of people with different objectives. A lot of people are just going along with it.
Yeah, as I was trying to say, I think most of them are true or not, if not true believers, at least believers to an extent. They believe parts of it or enough of it to justify their involvement in the cause.
Yeah, and they probably have some interest in it, because if they were really functional people, they wouldn't have time for this and they wouldn't be involved in it and so on.
Yeah.
So that, to some extent, it probably just speaks to them because it talks about the oppressed and so on. So it's a kind of slave morality in a sense. And it says that you being a loser is not your own fault. It's because of all these other things. And they need to externalize that feeling of being losers. And
but I don't know necessarily if it's a slave morality, but it's definitely.
I don't know. The difficulty with this particular model is that it gives me a way of disliking progressives, but it doesn't give me a way of appealing to them and splitting them off from their leaders. And that's kind of...
We have to show how that ideology is not actually achieving the ends that it says it is for them, and how it's not going to improve their lives.
Super chat.
Although the problem is that, super chat, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Fritz. I'll get the super
I was going to say, the problem, though, is this sounds an awful lot like, conservatives or Republicans, for decades trying to convince African Americans not to vote Democrat. And, these coalitions or these factions within the Progressive Coalition, a lot of them, it seems incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to remove them. A certain demographic, and I think Dave touched on a lot of it with his nerd culture series, is, young socially afflicted men, particularly young white men, not just because of the race, but, just circumstance, that, I think they should honestly they need to take a look in what on earth do they gain from the progressive movement, which are constantly screaming about, white and male privilege and, constantly interfering with their own hobbies. What do they gain from being part of the progressive movement? I think
they don't, and many of them are starting to fall away from it. I think we need to distinguish between which groups can be broken off and which groups can never be broken off because of inherent characteristics of those groups or their members. Because obviously, say the Republican Party is probably wasting its time with black people, because the Republican Party, for all intents and purposes, is the party of white people. And everyone knows that at some level. And so, of course, black people are generally not going to buy into that because it doesn't speak to them, and it never will. But if we're talking about angry white males, then that's another matter entirely.
Well, I mean, right now, what you need to do is you need to split off some of the demographics that fund things. And this is, unfortunately, a distant right people are kind of operating in isolation of a good funding source.
Which is the right wing.
Well, yeah, I mean, the right wing doesn't exactly have a lot of activist dollars.
Yeah.
And
they got a lot of dollars.
Even in the right wing, the distant right has a distinct difficulty of trying to even communicate with these National Review people. What?
But why would it? Because anyone who has power and money in society, to the extent that they would be able to fund something like the right, Why would they do that? Because they benefit from the existing status quo. So they, by definition, the people who would want to overturn the status quo don't have any money and power, and the people who have money and power wouldn't want to overturn the status quo, and that's always going to be the sort of catch-22 in this situation. You'll get a few people who are sort of class traitors, if you like Donald Trump or Richard Spencer or people like that.
I wouldn't necessarily call Donald Trump a class traitor.
Well, in some sense, well, I mean, he's probably.
Well, we understand he's certainly not making himself popular at Manhattan cocktail parties.
But I don't think he was.
But okay, say Richard Spencer, he might be a better example. Richard Spencer is someone who could have just gone all of his life. He could have played in the system, and he could have had a nice little career in conservative ink or whatever, or anything within high society. He could have done all of that, but he didn't. But there are going to be very few people like that, because why?
Yeah, and he didn't, and got him ostracized.
Yeah, and people know that, of course.
It doesn't help that he's a massive prick, but
I unfortunately don't really like Richard Spencer, but yeah, I get what your point is. There's a certain number of incentives, but these things aren't uncrackable, right? And I kind of want. I mean, there's just so many. There's so few people. The progressive movement has, in my opinion, nothing to offer 90% of the constituents that make it up, even African Americans. I think that in some sense it is sort of futile for a reactionary movement to try to split off these groups. But at the end of the day, they can't pay out to them, if you know what I mean, right?
I think that what I suspect is happening with those groups, a really good example would be Asians in the West. They generally don't tip right, even though you would think that economically they have incentives tip right, and you would think that they get punished by affirmative action and all of these other things, right? So Chinese living in California, for instance, the
California Republican Party has been waiting for 20 years for Asians to vote Republican.
Now, my theory on this is that there are two things. One is that inherently they just don't identify with, say, the Republican Party because they perceive it, whether rightly or wrongly, as being sort of the wrong kind of white culture. It's rednecks, for want of a better term.
Well, it's the white party,
and they don't identify with that. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that although they don't necessarily have much in common with the other people in their coalition, at some level they recognize their true opposition as being functional white people, and if they can break them, then they think that they will, and what remains is the coalition of the left. They will rise. They will be the top of that heap, and they won't have any competition after that. So it's sort of in their interests to compete against other functional people because they're their true opposition. The other people in the left-wing coalition are not really in competition with them, according to them. That's what I think is going on. That's why those two things are why I don't think they've joined the right wing as such.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, there's not. I mean, yeah, I guess this is. I've actually, I think people like myself and people on the distant right, like Steve Saylor and other people who, like, maybe even people writing for like Zero Hedge, and some people on the left like Traditionalist Codex have entertained ideas like this. The difficulty is that at some point, any kind of replacement for progressivism is going to need to create a vision of a reigning world order.
Of course, but I think people are short-sighted in that they always think they can engage in a kind of brinkmanship or play a dangerous game and that they will win. They always think they're the smart enough guy in the room to be able to do that. And we see this with wars that have occurred in history, such as World War I, or we see it with the financial shenanigans that go on every so often, and then someone almost blows up the system. People always think that they have control. It's kind of the Frankenstein analogy, if you like. People always think they have control. And yeah, I'm smarter than that guy. This time is different, all of that kind of stuff, until it isn't. But up until that point, they're willing to play that game because they think that they will be the one who will win at that game.
No, well, I guess, but I think what people are looking for right now is a different way. right? Like it doesn't need to be like a big path. It just needs to be a big enough path to carry something forward. That isn't going to go down with this ship. Because the progressive movement and this vision that they have is, it's not going to pay out to anybody. If it was going to pay out, they wouldn't be so incredibly vindictive.
Well, but for now, it is paying out for certain people because they're shielded from. They're shielded from the. Oh, sorry, someone.
It's
What?
echoing again.
I don't know how to fix it.
Just mute yourself when you're not talking. And
Yeah, I know, but I just want to mention something. What do you guys think is going to be the end point of progressivism?
Well,
yeah, I mean, it looks at this point like it's going to take society down with it, but that doesn't mean you can't.
Large part of society.
Like, how do you think it's going to take the society down with it? I mean, what specifically or concretely?
Well, how did communism take the Soviet Union down? You build up massive amounts of entropy, whether we're talking about economically, culturally, whatever. And those who are functional have absolutely no incentive to be functional, so they start dropping out in droves. And all of the dysfunctional people get put in charge of things that they can't run the ship, and everything just grinds to a halt eventually. And then you get this massive reaction against that.
I mean, essentially, society is based around a certain number of people who are loyal to it. It's either an organic loyalty or it's a loyalty that comes from the fact that society's making good on its promises, like in a financial sense. Like I said, everything that society considers a right is a vow. Now, we've discarded organic loyalty that comes naturally with vows. Now we're talking about whether they can actually deliver. When they can't deliver, there's going to be a metastasizing breakdown, and people are going to be looking for new people who think they can deliver.
Yeah, okay, I understand what you're saying.
When you lose the mandate of heaven, someone else will always appear and offer an
alternative. Yeah, but I mean, how do you guys think is going to be? Is it going to be specifically? I mean, I understand like the generality.
I mean, specifics on predictions are kind of the hard part, right? I mean, you can see a system that's unsustainable. You're not exactly sure when it's going to break down, but
or how.
No, but what do you think would be the step of progressivism that you say, aha, this is the step that they take that is going to wind up in chaos and just.
But okay, if you remember the housing crisis, right? Like,
sure,
everybody knew that the housing. The Economist, the magazine, it was printing monthly articles about how the housing market was overpriced. Everyone knew it was overpriced. People kept on buying because although everyone knew it was overpriced, people were like, well, it's not going to crash in the next month, is it? It's not going to crash in the next year, is it? It's easy to see something is unsustainable. It's very difficult to tell exactly when it's going to hit, the wall.
Yeah, or how.
Yeah.
Never forget the how. It's important.
I mean, you can have some general idea of the how, but really specifically you can't.
Well, I think the how that we're looking at is probably going to be something to the effect of a specific group is going to be cut out of the, I guess we'll call it the progressive stack, for lack of a better term right now. And then that might cause the other groups to realize that this is, are they next on the list or whatever? And then that would cause the collapse. And if not at that group is where the other groups draw the line, then it'll just keep going until
it'll be when the pie begins. And they can no longer give each people the slice of the pie that they want.
And the amount of pie that they promise them.
Yeah, that's right. And then there will have to be trade-offs there, and the people who lose out of those trade-offs will not be impressed by that.
Even as well, I think even on an ideological level, is progressives in a lot of ways are they're utopian. They keep envisioning like if we just keep voting Democrat, if you just keep fighting the good fight, we'll get the progressive utopia where there's no more racism. But again, the problem then is that obviously for progressives, in order for them to continue to exist, there can never actually have the utopia be realized, neither practically nor ideologically, because if they determine there's now a point where there's no more racism or sexism, then they don't really need to exist, and the coalition would fracture anyways. But I think you'd also just have a lot of attrition at some point, wherein people just start increasingly, like African Americans or let's say white women, start seeing that no matter what happens, they keep saying like we have to keep fighting, and there's no end in sight to this. They're probably just people might slough off just because they're tired.
So I think I get the sense that we're on the same page of this, and we are coming up on time here. But I feel really bad. First of all, I have a super chat from Neverender saying, "Is this what happens when dudes have weak Tinder games?" I think he was referring to people joining the Progressive Coalition. Well, I'm not so sure as pure luck in the dating pool is the reason why ContraPoints is a SJW after he supposedly was conservative. But it's an interesting theory. I'm not going to lie. Thank you for the super chat, Neverender.
ContraPoints is probably a libertarian.
ContraPoints probably was a libertarian, but now it's just kind of scary.
That's what happens when you chemically castrate yourself, man. Or did he actually castrate himself?
I don't want to speculate. It's just I don't know. It's not have anything to do with his physical transformations. Frankly, I just find the vocal changes to be really off-putting. But I don't know if I can really
physical and the mental.
Talking to someone in a man's voice and then getting to the point where they develop an effeminate one is it creates a psychological dissonance that I find a little bit hard to hack. But well, I don't know, guys. How about this? Does anyone have any white pills?
What would?
I feel like we've gotten to this point where we're staring down. I mean, we've talked a lot about this, the fact that this isn't sustainable.
I think I could give you both a red pill and a white
alternative.
pill.
I mean, we could end on this. If we could end on anything, I'd like to end on that.
Well, the hope of the resurrection, the second coming, but
that's only a white pill for some people.
Well,
no, I have a white pill. I think if you can be a highly functional person and create a group of other people who are highly functional, have a family that's highly functional, and so on. If you can do all of that and somehow fly beneath the radar, then you'll win by default. When everything else is so dysfunctional and other people are so mentally ill, you'll just waltz into power, essentially.
And I would take this. Blackjack, you're echoing.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Mute yourself. All right. I was going to say, for me, it's I actually always take hope from the words of General Erich von Manstein, whatever. He wasn't Jewish. But that don't what is it like? Never consider war. A war is never lost until you consider it lost. And what I take from that is, so long as there's one person that's left fighting, there's always hope. So long as there's one person that actually holds ideas counter to the whole progressive, Leviathan, I think there's always we can always hold out hope that they can, if one person can be convinced, more can be convinced.
Well, that was more about mindset, but I'm sure that's a great.
Thank you for deflating that, Blackjack.
Sorry.
It's fair enough. The difficulty is with I like reactionary expats formulation, and we are winding down now. I think Catholic Wench has gone to bed. It's past her bedtime, but it's past mine too. So I'm gonna have to start. I think the difficulty always is that we need to have a functional community online, because that's just how the game is played. But it's also very difficult to develop new functionality online because of the fundamental nature of online being sort of self-indulgent to a certain extent. And that's sort of what I've struggled with a little bit. And the other thing is that, being highly functional is also, there's sort of an antithetical nature of highly functional people. They don't like winning by default. I don't know. It's a strange trade-off, but I'll say that.
Yeah, I was going to say I didn't think flying under the radar should be really a goal. I think flying under the radar should be a temporary hope for maybe waiting for a more advantageous position. But I think
you need to fly under the radar until you can. We don't have a place to land that isn't under the radar.
Yeah.
There still are to some extent. I mean, how did people do all of these things in the Soviet Union? There were people who were red-pilled. They just kept it to themselves. They didn't have to announce to everyone at every moment what they believed.
Well, yeah, but the end goal was Putin, and he's certainly not flying under the radar. Nor did he when he started to take power.
Well, that's right, but my point is that he couldn't have done that in the 1970s or the 1980s.
No, he couldn't.
The Soviet Union had to collapse, and then it had to go through the Yeltsin years and so on. And then that was his opportunity. And people who were functional during that time could perhaps do something. But it's a matter of timing. If you're premature, then all you're doing is sticking your neck out, and it's going to get chopped off. And that's no help to you, obviously, but it's also no help to anyone else.
Yeah. But I mean, in the 90s.
The strange thing is that the internet is such an opportunity. I mean, what's so funny about this is that everyone here is not in the radar, so to speak, but we're still having a public live stream with, about at the peak of the live stream, about 200 people watching. So what's so strange is and fortuitous, and maybe this is my white pill, the internet is the only tool that we need to make this work, other than will, and specifically the will to overcome risk aversion in a variety of ways. And also disciplined to make specific goals come about and to take these risks. And I think it's fortuitous, and in some sense I firmly believe providential, if you forgive my religiosity, or I guess you have to since this is my channel. But I believe that the internet is in some sense providential, because it literally is the only tool that people need to organize under the radar. It's the ultimate tool. And the only thing that we need to overcome is our own nature to be indolent and self-indulgent. It's sort of ironic.
Basically, to take Fritz's quote from Eric von Manstein, you've only lost until you haven't lost until you've taken the black pill. Mm-hmm. You take the black pill, that's when you've lost.
Yeah.
All right. Any other white pills people would like to drop before we call it a night?
Gen Z, guys.
That's
Gen Z will save us.
I'll let you have that one.
That's a joke. Come on.
I didn't mean to shoot down anyone's white pill. They weren't attempts to shoot him down. We were just offering context.
I do have one question though about the Unpopular Opinions. Is your one on steampunk in the first 25, or was that a later one?
Yeah, I did skip over one that was a little bit like this. I think the stuff on specific art forms. I did say this was in the first 25. I said most people who like science fiction just want romantic adventure stories. The problem is that modern man cannot imagine romantic adventure stories taking place in the real world without magic or magic-like technology.
Okay.
Steampunk I think comes a little bit later, but
yeah, because I actually do have stuff to talk. I do have something to talk about.
For a stream at another time.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, the stuff on specific culture comes a little bit later.
Space Cowboy.
Anime. You can't live with
die a fiery death.
Live with it. You can't completely get rid of it.
I can dream.
Why are you explain to me the fascination with anime? I've never understood it.
I think
romanticism. Romanticism. That's all it is, right?
Hyper romanticism.
Okay.
So it's the content or the style? I mean, I don't know.
In any case,
if you look at most animes, they present highly ordered traditional societies in very cute and sanitized ways, and all the conflicts are super dramatic and romantic. It's like it's a Thomas Cole painting essentially. I mean, it's the sugar and salt MSG combination. I mean, sometimes it's really good. I mean, like Miyazaki, right? But a lot of times the hyper romanticism is just
Too much.
hard to get anything out of. Plus, there's a problem that, the Neo Genesis Evangelion problem, that their deep concepts that they reference are not understood even by the people who are writing the animes. And they're superficially sprinkled in.
Are any animes created in or by people in the West?
Avatar: The Last Airbender.
That one was actually good though.
And how do they compare to the Japanese ones?
I would say it's actually substantially better than. It's like it'd be in the upper percentile of anime. It's certainly better than most, I would say.
I think Avatar is better than any anime.
I would say there's some I personally like more, but it's certainly incredibly good. And the interesting thing I have about it, and I think we can end after this, but is that it's in a way it disguises. If you look under the surface, it disguises very explicitly Christian and Western concepts of morality underneath sort of a surface level Asian mysticism.
You're talking about Avatar, right?
Yeah. Like there's very clear, like if it wasn't, it could be easily be set in the West, and you would think this is a like classic work of like Western, but because of the sort of popularity of anime at the time, with younger people and just the sort of like aversion to Western stuff, unfortunately, they sort of have to wrap it within this nice little like, isn't it cool East Asian culture, karate, magic, wrapping, but underneath it, there is actual deeply Western and Christian themes. That is not just the Evangelion stuff.
Well, I guess you'd have to point it out to me, because I'm a huge skeptic at this point of these messages. Every now and again, you get an author that might have an idea, but I feel it's a little bit.
Covered those.
It's a little bit.
I mean, it's a rarity.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't know. I don't like just dismissing whole forms of art, but it is somewhat of a concern. I don't know. Well, I'm sure, Fritz, you'll explore this on your podcast, right?
Yeah. At some point, I will.
But
I've been talking to all the people in the community for like probably half the time for the past couple days, so I don't know. I'm a bit tired and tuckered out now.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to end this, but we're not gonna end on anime. But I'll say to everyone, thank you for showing up.
Thank you very much. It was a great stream. I would have to say.
Yeah.
Didn't you just end on anime?
Tiring, but it was good. So thanks for everyone for showing up. Any last sentiments?
You just said you weren't going to end on anime, and then you did.
Oh, well, I guess I'd wish everyone a happy Lent. We're
keep on trucking, people. Keep on trucking.
Go to church.
And I guess I don't really have any sentiments to follow up. Really, the thing I wanted to end on was the white pill, and I think the white pill, and what everyone here listening should think about is
really just during the last 5 minutes.
Okay, let me finish.
Sorry.
Everyone should think about, when they sign off, is how they can create for themselves spiritual communities of support, and use those to develop connections going forward. I'd like to be a resource for that, and if you're interested, contact me, because I'd love to help out. But I'd like to think that in this channel, I have people who follow me, who are critics, and who are friends. But I really hate to think that anyone watching this is a fan. I hate that word. I hope that everyone watching this is either someone who wants to criticize my ideas, which I welcome, or who wants to try to discover one of these ways through modernity, in which case I consider that person to be an ally. And I hope that the conversations we're having here can be the first step at building those communities of support, be they as simple as a Discord server, a new publication, perhaps a new business or a new piece of alt tech, or just a really strong church community or a really strong community that studies Western arts. So I'm sure this will be the subject of future conversations, but on that note and not on anime, I'll sign off and have everyone have a blessed remainder of Lenten season.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.